Hi everyone, welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's stories. Story 1. On October 8, 2009, Bobby Dale Jamison, his wife Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison vanished near Red Oak, Oklahoma. Their abandoned truck was found days later, containing their personal belongings, a substantial amount of cash, and their beloved dog, nearly starved but alive. What happened to this family of 3 would remain a mystery for more than 4 years, with theories ranging from foul play to voluntary disappearance. Bobby Dale Jamison was 44 years old at the time of his disappearance. Born and raised in Oklahoma, Bobby had worked various jobs throughout his life. He had been injured in a car accident in 2003, which left him with some disability and chronic pain. Friends described him as intelligent and hardworking, though somewhat reserved. Sherilyn Leanne Jamison was 40 years old. She was more outgoing than her husband, described by friends as vibrant and creative, though sometimes troubled. Sherilyn had struggled with mood swings and depression following the death of her sister a few years earlier. She was a devoted mother who homeschooled their daughter Madison. Madison Stormy Jamison was just 6 years old when she disappeared alongside her parents. By all accounts, she was a bright, happy child with a vivid imagination. She loved animals, particularly the family's dog, a Shiba Inu named Maisie. The Jamisons lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, a small city of about 3,000 people located in McIntosh County. Their home was a modest white house on a quiet residential street. The family had moved there in 2007, seeking a fresh start after Bobby's accident and Sherilyn's family troubles. Life in Eufaula was not always easy for the Jamisons. They had filed a protective order against Bobby's father in 2008, claiming he had threatened to kill them. The family had also experienced financial difficulties following Bobby's accident, though at the time of their disappearance, they appeared to have some money, enough to consider buying a 40-acre plot of land near Red Oak, Oklahoma. Friends and neighbors later reported that the Jamisons had been behaving somewhat strangely in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. Some described them as increasingly paranoid. Bobby and Sherilyn had installed security cameras around their home and had spoken about spirits they believed were haunting their house. Sherilyn had even asked a pastor if their home might need an exorcism. Despite these concerning behaviors, the family maintained relatively normal routines. Madison was being homeschooled. Bobby was pursuing a disability claim. Sherilyn took care of the household. They attended church occasionally and maintained relationships with extended family members. In early October 2009, the Jamisons decided to look at a 40-acre plot of land they were considering purchasing near Red Oak, Oklahoma. Red Oak is a very small, rural community in Latimer County, approximately 30 miles from their home in Eufaula. The area is characterized by its rugged terrain, dense forests, steep hills, and isolated stretches of wilderness in the Sans Bois Mountains. The land they were interested in was particularly remote, accessible only via winding dirt roads that cut through the heavily forested landscape. Cell phone reception in the area was spotty at best, and the nearest neighbors would have been miles away. It was the kind of place where one could truly disconnect from the outside world, for better or worse. On October 8, 2009, the family set out for Red Oak. Security camera footage from their home captured them as they packed their white Chevrolet truck. The images show Bobby and Sherilyn making multiple trips between the house and the truck, loading supplies and personal items. In one concerning detail that would later puzzle investigators, the footage shows them moving as if in a trance, walking back and forth robotically, rarely speaking to each other. They brought with them their daughter Madison, their dog Maisie, and supplies for what appeared to be a day trip to view the property. They left Eufaula sometime in the morning, driving the approximately 30 miles to the remote area near Red Oak where their potential property was located. What they didn't know was that this ordinary trip to view a piece of land would be their final journey. October 8, 2009, was a typical autumn day in southeastern Oklahoma. The temperature was mild, the skies partly cloudy. The forests around Red Oak would have been beginning to show their fall colors, reds, oranges, and yellows painting the landscape. The dirt roads winding through the Sans Bois Mountains would have been dry and passable, though rugged and isolated. The Jamison's movements that day can be partially reconstructed through cell phone records and witness accounts. They arrived in the Red Oak area around midday and spent time looking at the property they were considering purchasing. A local man who owned adjacent land reported briefly speaking with them that afternoon. He said they seemed normal and interested in the property, asking about water access and boundary lines. After viewing the property, the Jamisons apparently decided to explore the surrounding area further. The roads in this region twist through dense forest and steep hills, making it easy to become disoriented without a good map or familiarity with the terrain. What happened after this point remains unknown. At some point during the afternoon or evening of October 8, something went wrong. The Jamisons never returned home to Eufaula. They never checked in with family or friends. Their plans after viewing the property remain a mystery. On October 16, 2009, 8 days after the family was last seen, a local hunter made a disturbing discovery. While hunting in the remote area near Red Oak, he came across an abandoned white Chevrolet truck on a dirt road. The truck was locked, with the keys missing, and contained a number of personal belongings. Concerned, the hunter reported the vehicle to the Latimer County Sheriff's Office. When deputies arrived at the scene, they confirmed the truck belonged to the Jamison family. Inside, they found a disturbing tableau that only deepened the mystery. The family's dog, Maisie, was still inside the truck, barely alive after 8 days without proper food or water. Also in the vehicle were the Jamisons' wallets, IDs, Bobby's cell phone, a GPS unit, jackets, and, most surprisingly, $32,000 in cash stuffed into a bank bag. The presence of the cash was particularly puzzling. Why would the family leave such a substantial sum behind if they were leaving voluntarily? And if they had encountered foul play, why hadn't the perpetrator taken the money? Also found in the truck was Sherilyn's purse, which contained her prescription medication. Friends later confirmed that Sherilyn took this medication regularly for depression and would be unlikely to intentionally leave it behind. Perhaps most haunting was a Polaroid photograph found in the truck. It showed Madison standing in what appeared to be the woods, looking solemn. Investigators were never able to determine exactly when or where this photo was taken, or by whom. The truck was parked on a dirt road approximately 3 miles from the property the Jamisons had been considering purchasing. The area was extremely remote, with dense forest all around. The terrain was challenging, steep slopes, thick underbrush, and numerous ravines that could hide evidence or remains for years. The location of the truck raised immediate questions. Had the family become lost while exploring and abandoned their vehicle for some reason? Had they encountered someone on these isolated roads who wished them harm? Had they walked away voluntarily, perhaps in an impaired mental state? Based on the condition of the dog, investigators estimated the truck had been abandoned for the entire 8 days since the family was last seen. This timeline suggested whatever had happened to the Jamisons had occurred on October 8 or very early on October 9. The discovery of the truck triggered a massive search operation. Law enforcement officers from multiple agencies, alongside volunteers and search and rescue teams, combed the rugged terrain surrounding the abandoned vehicle. Helicopters with thermal imaging equipment flew overhead. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search for human remains. The effort was one of the largest missing persons searches in Oklahoma's history. Despite these extensive efforts, no trace of Bobby, Sherilyn, or Madison was found during the initial search. The family had vanished without a clear trail, as if they had walked into the dense Oklahoma forest and simply disappeared. As days turned into weeks with no sign of the Jamison family, investigators began digging deeper into their lives, searching for clues that might explain their mysterious disappearance. The investigation quickly revealed a complex picture of the Jameson family, one that didn't easily fit into a simple narrative. Friends and family described behavior in the weeks leading up to the disappearance that, in retrospect, seemed concerning. Sherilyn's father, Robert Inman, told investigators that his daughter had been acting paranoid, expressing fear that someone was out to get her family. She had apparently asked him for a gun shortly before the disappearance. Similarly, a pastor from their church reported that Sherilyn had contacted him about performing an exorcism on their home, believing evil spirits were present. Bobby had also been exhibiting unusual behavior. He had lost a significant amount of weight in the months before the disappearance, as much as 100 pounds according to some reports. Friends suggested this weight loss wasn't entirely due to natural causes, raising questions about potential illness or substance use. The security camera footage from the Jamisons' home on the day they disappeared became a focus of the investigation. Law enforcement officials and family members who viewed the footage described the couple's movements as trance-like or robotic. They appeared to be loading the truck mechanically, rarely interacting with each other and showing little emotion. This footage led to speculation about the family's mental state on the day they disappeared. Were they under the influence of substances? Were they experiencing some kind of shared psychological episode? Or was there a more mundane explanation for their seemingly odd behavior? Investigators also looked into the Jamisons' financial situation. The $32,000 found in their truck raised obvious questions about where this cash had come from and why they had it with them. Some reports suggested the money was related to a pending disability settlement for Bobby, while others indicated it might have been savings intended for the land purchase. However, the presence of such a large amount of cash also led to speculation about potential involvement in illegal activities. Another puzzling element was an 11-page letter found in the Jamisons' home, written by Sherilyn to Bobby. The letter contained angry accusations and expressed deep frustration, suggesting significant marital problems. However, friends noted that the couple often communicated through written notes even when upset with each other, so while concerning, the letter wasn't necessarily indicative of an imminent separation or violence. As the investigation continued, several theories emerged. The first theory was foul play. Perhaps the family had encountered someone dangerous in the remote area, a drug dealer protecting a marijuana growing operation, a squatter on the land they were viewing, or even a random predator. The isolated location would have made them vulnerable, with little chance of witnesses or help nearby. The second theory involved a drug connection. Some investigators speculated that the large amount of cash, combined with Bobby's dramatic weight loss and the family's paranoid behavior, might indicate involvement with methamphetamine or other drugs. Perhaps they had run afoul of dealers or were experiencing drug-induced paranoia that led to their disappearance. A third theory suggested a murder-suicide scenario. The marital tensions evidenced by Sherilyn's letter, combined with her history of depression and the family's reportedly strange behavior, led some to speculate that one parent may have harmed the others and then themselves. A fourth theory proposed voluntary disappearance. Perhaps the family had planned to start a new life elsewhere, though this theory struggled to explain why they would leave their dog, wallets, IDs, and a large sum of cash behind. Finally, some locals and even family members suggested supernatural explanations, pointing to the Jamisons' own reported beliefs about spirits in their home and the trance-like behavior captured on camera. Law enforcement pursued numerous leads in the months following the disappearance. They interviewed family members, friends, and associates. They investigated potential sightings of the family, all of which ultimately proved false. They explored Bobby's ongoing legal dispute with his father and looked into reports of a cult-like church the family may have been involved with. Despite these efforts, the case grew cold. Months passed with no significant developments. The Jamison family's disappearance became one of Oklahoma's most baffling mysteries, the subject of true crime forums, podcasts, and television specials. Amateur sleuths proposed countless theories, but hard evidence remained elusive. And then, more than 4 years after they vanished, came a discovery that would provide some answers while deepening other aspects of the mystery. On November 16, 2013, more than 4 years after the Jameson family disappeared, a group of deer hunters made a grim discovery in the remote woods of the Sans Bois Mountains, less than 3 miles from where the family's truck had been found. The hunters spotted what appeared to be human remains partially exposed on a rocky hillside. They immediately notified the Latimer County Sheriff's Office, who dispatched deputies to the scene. Investigators arrived to find the skeletal remains of 3 individuals, laid out side by side, face down on the ground. Due to the condition of the remains after years of exposure to the elements, immediate identification was impossible. However, given the location and the presence of 3 bodies, 2 adults and 1 child, authorities strongly suspected they had finally found the Jameson family. The area where the remains were discovered was exceptionally remote and difficult to access. The terrain was rocky and steep, covered with dense underbrush and forest. It was approximately 2.7 miles from where the family's truck had been abandoned in 2009. This area had technically been within the search zone during the initial investigation, but the challenging landscape had made a comprehensive search nearly impossible. The Oklahoma State Medical Examiner's Office took custody of the remains for analysis and identification. Due to their deteriorated condition, traditional identification methods were insufficient. The Medical Examiner's Office turned to forensic anthropology and DNA testing. In July 2014, nearly 8 months after the discovery and almost 5 years after the disappearance, the Oklahoma State Medical Examiner's Office officially confirmed what many had suspected: the remains belonged to Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jameson. Despite this confirmation, the medical examiner was unable to determine a cause of death for any of the 3 family members. The skeletal remains showed no obvious signs of trauma or injury. No bullet wounds, no fractures indicative of violence, no clear evidence of how they had died. The manner of death was classified as unknown. This determination only deepened the mystery. How had all 3 family members died in the same location, at apparently the same time, without leaving any forensic evidence of the cause? Some experts speculated that exposure to the elements could have been responsible. The Jamesons had disappeared in October, when temperatures in the Oklahoma mountains can drop significantly at night. If they had become lost or stranded without adequate supplies, hypothermia was a possibility. Others suggested that poison or drug overdose might have been responsible, as these methods might leave no trace on skeletal remains after years of exposure. However, without toxicology evidence, this remained purely speculative. The position of the bodies, laid out side by side, face down, struck many investigators as unusual for people who had simply gotten lost and succumbed to the elements. This positioning suggested to some that the bodies may have been deliberately placed there after death, potentially indicating foul play. The discovery of the remains ruled out some theories while lending credence to others. Clearly, the family had not voluntarily disappeared to start a new life elsewhere. The proximity of their remains to the abandoned truck suggested they hadn't traveled far after leaving their vehicle. But crucial questions remained unanswered. Why had they left their truck with valuables still inside? How had they ended up nearly 3 miles away in difficult terrain? What had caused the deaths of all 3 family members in the same location, leaving no forensic evidence of the cause? Sheriff Israel Beecham, who had led the initial investigation in 2009 but had since left office, commented to the media that he believed foul play was involved given the unusual circumstances and the positioning of the bodies. However, without definitive evidence, no official determination could be made. For the families of Bobby and Sherilyn, the discovery brought a measure of closure. At least they now knew what had happened to their loved ones, but the lack of answers regarding how and why they died continued to haunt them. The media attention surrounding the discovery of the remains renewed public interest in the case. True crime enthusiasts and amateur detectives once again pored over the known facts, generating new theories and revisiting old ones. The case was featured on numerous television programs and podcasts, each offering their own interpretation of the limited evidence. Despite this renewed attention and the definitive identification of the remains, law enforcement made little progress in determining what had actually happened to the Jameson family. The case remained officially open, but active investigation dwindled without new leads to pursue. In the years following the discovery of the Jameson family's remains, numerous theories have been proposed to explain their tragic fate. Each theory has its supporters and detractors, with evidence both supporting and contradicting various aspects of each scenario. The first major theory involves criminal activity. Proponents of this theory point to the remote location, which was known for illegal marijuana growing operations. Perhaps the family inadvertently stumbled upon such an operation while exploring the area they hoped to purchase, and were killed to eliminate witnesses. The $32,000 in cash left in their truck remains puzzling under this theory. Why would criminals motivated by financial gain leave such a sum behind? Some variations of this theory suggest involvement of local methamphetamine producers or dealers. The Sans Bois Mountains, like many remote rural areas across America, had seen their share of methamphetamine production. Bobby's significant weight loss prior to the disappearance led some to speculate about potential drug use or involvement. A second theory involves a murder-suicide scenario. In this theory, one parent, typically Bobby, in most versions, killed the others and then himself, perhaps due to mental health issues or family tensions. The 11-page letter written by Sherilyn and found in their home indicated marital problems, and friends had reported that both Bobby and Sherilyn had been behaving strangely in the weeks before their disappearance. However, this theory struggles to explain certain elements. If one parent had killed the others at the truck, how and why would they have moved all three bodies nearly 3 miles through difficult terrain before taking their own life? And the medical examiner found no evidence of trauma on the skeletal remains that would clearly indicate homicide. A third theory suggests the family fell victim to the elements after becoming lost. Perhaps they left their truck to explore the property on foot, became disoriented in the unfamiliar territory, and couldn't find their way back. Without supplies and shelter, exposure to the elements, particularly if temperatures dropped at night, could have proven fatal. This theory accounts for the family being found together and explains why valuable items were left in the truck. However, it doesn't fully address why they would have traveled nearly 3 miles from their vehicle or why they would have left their dog behind in the truck. A fourth theory proposes that the family was experiencing a shared psychological episode. Both Bobby and Sherilyn had reportedly been behaving erratically before their disappearance. Friends described them as paranoid, installing security cameras and speaking of spirits in their home. The trance-like behavior captured on their home security footage on the day they disappeared has led some to speculate they may have been experiencing shared psychosis or were under the influence of substances that affected their decision-making. In this scenario, perhaps they fled their truck in a state of paranoia or confusion, wandered into the wilderness, and succumbed to the elements or to the effects of drugs or untreated mental health issues. A particularly controversial theory involves what locals call the Spike Road Cult, allegedly a religious group operating in the area with potentially sinister practices. Some reports suggest the Jamisons may have had connections to this group or a similar organization. Sherilyn's request for an exorcism and references to evil spirits have fueled speculation about cult involvement. However, law enforcement has never publicly confirmed the existence of such a cult, and evidence for this theory remains largely anecdotal and circumstantial. Adding to the mystery are several unusual elements that don't neatly fit into any theory. For instance, a pastor who knew the family reported that Madison had spoken of seeing 2 spirits in their house, one of a little boy who had died in a car accident in front of their home, and another of a woman. While children often have active imaginations, this report, combined with Sherilyn's concerns about spirits, has fueled supernatural theories among some observers. Another puzzling detail is the last photo of Madison found in the truck. The solemn expression on her face and the timing of the photo, apparently taken shortly before the family's disappearance, has led to much speculation. Who took the photo and why? What does Madison's expression indicate about her state of mind or the family's situation at that time? Bobby's ongoing legal dispute with his father has also been scrutinized. The protective order filed in 2008 alleged that Bobby's father had threatened to kill the family. While law enforcement investigated and apparently ruled out his involvement, some family members and online sleuths have continued to question whether this conflict might be related to the disappearance. The behavior of law enforcement during the investigation has also generated controversy. Some family members and observers have criticized what they perceive as a lack of urgency in the initial response and insufficient resources dedicated to the search. Others have questioned why certain leads weren't pursued more aggressively or why some evidence wasn't properly preserved. Sheriff Israel Beecham, who led the initial investigation but resigned in 2011 amid unrelated legal troubles, has himself become a subject of speculation in some corners of the internet. However, no credible evidence has emerged linking him or his office to any impropriety in the handling of the Jameson case. Perhaps most frustrating for those seeking answers is the lack of physical evidence. The remote location, the condition of the remains after 4 years of exposure to the elements, and the absence of witnesses have left investigators with few concrete clues to work with. Even the positioning of the bodies, while striking and unusual, could potentially be explained by various scenarios from deliberate placement to natural settling after death. In the absence of definitive evidence, the case has become a canvas onto which observers project their own fears, biases, and interpretations. What is clear is that 3 lives ended tragically in the Oklahoma wilderness, and the full truth of how and why may never be known. The disappearance and deaths of the Jameson family have left lasting impacts on their community, their surviving family members, and even on how similar cases are investigated and understood. For the people of Eufaula and Red Oak, the case shattered the sense of security that often characterizes rural communities. The idea that an entire family could vanish so completely, only to be found dead years later with no explanation, created a wound in the collective psyche of these small towns. Local residents reported being more cautious after the disappearance, particularly when venturing into the remote areas of the Sans Bois Mountains. Parents kept closer watch on their children. Property owners became more vigilant about securing their land and reporting suspicious activity. The case also highlighted the challenges of conducting searches and investigations in remote, rugged terrain. The area where the Jamesons disappeared and were eventually found epitomizes the difficulties faced by search and rescue operations in wilderness environments. Dense vegetation, steep slopes, limited access points, and vast spaces make comprehensive searches nearly impossible, even with significant resources. For law enforcement agencies in rural Oklahoma, the Jameson case became a learning experience. Procedures for missing persons cases were reviewed and, in some instances, revised. The importance of rapid response, thorough documentation, and preservation of evidence was underscored by the frustrating lack of answers in this high-profile case. The media coverage of the disappearance and subsequent discovery had both positive and negative effects. On one hand, it kept the case in the public eye, potentially encouraging witnesses to come forward and ensuring that the investigation wasn't abandoned. On the other hand, the sensationalistic treatment of the case by some outlets and the proliferation of wild theories online created noise that sometimes drowned out more measured analysis. For surviving family members, the impact has been immeasurable. Bobby's mother, Starlet Jameson, and Sherilyn's parents have spoken publicly about their grief and their frustration with the lack of answers. For years, they lived in limbo, not knowing if their loved ones were alive or dead. The discovery of the remains in 2013 brought an end to that particular torment but opened new wounds. Madison's paternal grandmother, Connie Cocotan, told reporters after the identification of the remains, "I think they were murdered. There's no doubt in my mind. What we want to know is who did it and why." The questions that haunt the family are the same ones that fascinate the public. What happened in those final hours or days? Did the Jamesons sense the danger they were in? Did they suffer? Could their deaths have been prevented if different choices had been made, by them, by law enforcement, by others who crossed their path? The case has also taken on significance in the true crime community. It exemplifies many elements that draw people to such stories: mysterious circumstances, puzzling evidence, ordinary people whose lives took a tragic turn, and the fundamental human desire to solve puzzles and make sense of the seemingly senseless. Podcasts, YouTube channels, and online forums dedicated to the case have proliferated over the years. Some of these platforms have approached the mystery with respect and rigor, while others have veered into sensationalism or unfounded speculation. The family has expressed mixed feelings about this attention, grateful that people care and want answers, but sometimes hurt by insensitive treatment of their personal tragedy. Beyond the specific details of the Jameson case, their story touches on broader themes that resonate deeply in American culture: the vulnerability that exists alongside freedom in remote rural areas, the complex interplay of mental health, substance use, and family dynamics, the limitations of our justice system when confronted with ambiguous evidence, and the thin line between ordinary life and extraordinary tragedy. The Jameson family story reminds us that behind every true crime case are real human beings, people with hopes, dreams, flaws, and complexities that can never be fully captured in news reports or investigations. Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison were more than the mystery of their disappearance and death. They were individuals with full lives, loved and missed by those who knew them. Perhaps the most profound legacy of the Jameson case is this reminder of life's fragility and unpredictability. A family sets out on what should be a routine trip to look at property and never returns home. In an instant, ordinary life transforms into extraordinary tragedy, leaving those left behind to search for answers that may never come. As one local resident told a reporter years after the discovery, "It makes you hold your loved ones closer. You never know when a normal day might be your last together." As our exploration of the Jameson family case draws to a close, we're left with more questions than answers, a situation that mirrors the experience of investigators, family members, and everyone else who has been touched by this haunting mystery. The facts we know with certainty are few. On October 8, 2009, Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jameson drove to a remote area near Red Oak, Oklahoma, to look at property they were considering purchasing. Their truck was found abandoned 8 days later, containing their personal belongings, their dog, and $32,000 in cash. More than 4 years after that, their skeletal remains were discovered about 3 miles from the truck, positioned side by side, face down on a rocky hillside. The medical examiner could not determine a cause of death. Everything beyond these basic facts, the how and why of their deaths, the circumstances that led them from their truck to their final resting place, the explanation for their reportedly strange behavior before the disappearance, remains in the realm of theory and speculation. Perhaps this is why the case continues to fascinate and disturb us. Human beings are natural storytellers. We crave narrative coherence and resolution. We want beginnings, middles, and ends that make sense. We want to understand motives and mechanisms. We want justice for wrongs and explanations for the inexplicable. The Jameson case denies us these satisfactions. It remains stubbornly open-ended, resistant to our desire for neat conclusions. It reminds us that sometimes, despite our best efforts, some mysteries remain unsolved. For the families of Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison, this lack of resolution compounds their grief. Closure, that often discussed but elusive concept in the aftermath of tragedy, remains incomplete without understanding what happened and why. Yet even without these answers, we can honor the memory of the Jameson family. We can acknowledge their humanity beyond the mystery of their deaths. We can recognize that they were people who loved and were loved, who had good days and bad, who experienced joy and sorrow, hope and disappointment, just like all of us. As you drift toward sleep tonight, with the soft sound of rain as your companion, perhaps you might spare a thought for Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jameson. Not as characters in a true crime story, but as fellow human beings whose lives and deaths remind us of our shared vulnerability and our common humanity. And perhaps, too, you might reflect on the preciousness of ordinary days, those unremarkable hours that we take for granted until they're gone. The morning coffee, the drive to work, the bedtime story read to a child. These moments, strung together, constitute our lives. The Jameson family's story reminds us to cherish them. The rain continues to fall our background, a gentle rhythm connecting you to the natural world. In that world, some questions remain unanswered, some mysteries unsolved. And that, too, is part of the human experience, learning to live with uncertainty, with questions that may never find their answers. If you're still awake and listening, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's move on to our next story. Story 2. Midlothian, Texas. A small city of about 30,000 residents located 25 miles southwest of Dallas. Known as the cement capital of Texas due to its 3 cement plants, it's a place where neighbors know each other, where community ties run deep, and where violent crime is uncommon. In 2016, Midlothian maintained its small-town feel despite steady growth over the years. Tree-lined streets connect neighborhoods where families often leave their doors unlocked. The Creekside Church of Christ on East U.S. Highway 287, where our story unfolds, was one of many places of worship serving the close-knit community. The church sits back from the highway, partially obscured by trees, with a large parking lot that's mostly empty in the pre-dawn hours. Inside, the building has a spacious layout with multiple hallways and rooms, a sanctuary, classrooms, and multipurpose spaces. The interior is modern yet modest, designed for both worship and community activities. April in Texas brings unpredictable weather, warm days and cool nights, occasional thunderstorms, and the vibrant bloom of bluebonnets along highways. By mid-April 2016, spring was well established in Midlothian, with temperatures already climbing into the 70s during the day. It was in this peaceful setting that 45-year-old Missy Beavers had established herself as a beloved fitness instructor. A mother of 3, Missy was known for her dedication to helping others improve their health through her Camp Gladiator boot camp-style fitness classes. These early morning sessions were popular among locals trying to fit exercise into their busy schedules. The early morning hours of Monday, April 18, 2016, were quiet in Midlothian. Most residents were still asleep as a light rain fell, leaving the streets slick and the air heavy with moisture. It was the kind of peaceful morning where the soft patter of raindrops on rooftops lulled late sleepers deeper into their dreams. No one could have imagined that in these tranquil pre-dawn hours, something sinister was unfolding at the Creekside Church of Christ. Terry Missy Beavers was 45 years old when her life was cut short. Standing 5 feet 3 inches tall, she had a warm smile that put her fitness clients at ease. Friends described her as energetic, passionate, and deeply committed to helping others reach their fitness goals. Born in Graham, Texas, Missy had been married to her husband Brandon for 20 years, and together they raised 3 daughters. Missy wasn't always a fitness instructor. After studying at Tarleton State University, she worked various jobs before finding her calling in fitness. In the years before her death, she had become certified as a Camp Gladiator trainer and quickly developed a following. Her early morning boot camps were particularly popular, as they allowed participants to work out before heading to their jobs. Those who knew Missy spoke of her infectious enthusiasm. She would often post motivational messages on social media, encouraging her clients and friends alike. "Rise and shine" was a common greeting on her Facebook page, usually accompanied by uplifting messages about health and perseverance. Despite some challenges in her personal life, including financial pressures that many middle-class families face, Missy maintained her positive outlook. Brandon Beavers, Missy's husband, worked in the construction industry. At the time of the incident, he was away on a fishing trip in Mississippi with his father and sons. By all accounts, Brandon was devastated by his wife's death. In the aftermath, he faced not only the loss of his partner but also the challenge of raising their daughters alone while under the uncomfortable spotlight of public speculation that often surrounds such cases. The Beavers' 3 daughters were teenagers and young adults at the time of their mother's death. Those who knew the family described them as close-knit, with Missy deeply involved in her daughters' lives despite her busy schedule. The girls were active in school and community activities, supported by their mother's encouragement. The Midlothian Police Department, led by Chief Carl Smith, was a small force unaccustomed to handling homicide investigations. Assistant Chief Kevin Johnson became a familiar face to the public as he led the investigation and press conferences. Previously dealing mostly with minor offenses and traffic violations, the department would find itself thrust into a complex murder investigation that would draw national attention. Detective Andy Vaughn was assigned as the lead investigator on the case. With limited homicide experience, he faced the daunting task of piecing together what happened in those early morning hours. His methodical approach and commitment to finding justice for Missy would keep the investigation active for years. The fitness community in Midlothian formed another important character in this story. Missy's clients were devoted to her classes, many becoming friends who valued her guidance and support. On that Monday morning, several were planning to attend her 5 a.m. class, expecting another energetic start to their week. Instead, they became witnesses to the aftermath of tragedy. Sunday, April 17, 2016 began as an ordinary day for the Beavers family. While Brandon was away on his fishing trip, Missy spent time with her daughters and prepared for the week ahead. She was active on social media that day, posting about her upcoming classes and responding to clients' questions. That evening, at approximately 8:12 p.m., Missy sent a message to her Camp Gladiator participants confirming the next morning's class would be held indoors at the Creekside Church of Christ due to the forecast of rain. She had arranged to use the church space several times before when weather didn't permit outdoor workouts. At 9:26 p.m., security cameras at a Walmart in nearby Waxahachie captured Missy shopping for workout supplies. She appeared relaxed, pushing a cart through the store, unaware that she had less than 8 hours to live. She purchased some exercise equipment for her class and headed home. Around 10 p.m., Missy was active on her personal Facebook page, sharing a motivational message about fitness and determination. This would be her final social media post. The timeline now shifts to the early hours of Monday, April 18th. While Missy was presumably asleep at home, something unusual was happening at the Creekside Church of Christ. At 3:50 a.m., approximately 1 hour before Missy was expected to arrive, the church's surveillance system recorded an unknown figure entering the building. The person was wearing what appeared to be tactical gear, a helmet with a face shield, a heavy vest or shirt with "Police" written across the chest, and tactical pants. The outfit gave the impression of law enforcement or security personnel. Though the person's movement was distinctive, they walked with a slight shuffle or swing of the right leg. For nearly 30 minutes, this individual wandered through the church, opening doors and examining rooms. Their movements lacked urgency but suggested purpose. At times, they carried what looked like a hammer or pry tool. The grainy black and white footage, while capturing this person's presence, did not provide a clear view of their face or other identifying features. At approximately 4:18 a.m., Missy's vehicle appears in the church parking lot on exterior cameras. As a dedicated instructor, she arrived early to set up for her 5 a.m. class. The footage does not show her entry into the building, but investigators believe she entered through the same door used by the unknown person earlier. What happened inside the church between 4:18 a.m. and 5 a.m. is not captured on video. No cameras recorded the encounter between Missy and the person in tactical gear, or the attack that would end her life. At 5 a.m., the first class participants began arriving at the church. Unable to locate Missy, they searched the building until one participant made the tragic discovery at approximately 5:06 a.m. Missy was found unresponsive on the floor, having suffered multiple puncture wounds to her head and chest. Despite immediate calls to emergency services, it was too late. At 5:12 a.m., the first police officers arrived at the scene, followed quickly by paramedics who pronounced Missy deceased. The church was immediately locked down as a crime scene, and the arriving fitness class participants were kept separated and interviewed. By 6 a.m., the Texas Rangers had been called in to assist the Midlothian Police Department with what was now officially a homicide investigation. Crime scene technicians began the meticulous process of collecting evidence while detectives started interviewing witnesses. At 8:30 a.m., Brandon Beavers received the devastating call about his wife while still in Mississippi. He immediately began the long drive back to Texas, accompanied by his father. By midday, news of the murder had spread throughout Midlothian and beyond. The police held their first press conference at 1:30 p.m., releasing limited information but confirming a homicide had occurred. They did not immediately release the surveillance footage of the person in tactical gear. On Tuesday, April 19, after reviewing the surveillance footage multiple times, investigators made the decision to release images of the unknown person to the public, hoping someone might recognize their distinctive walk or outfit. On Wednesday, April 20, Brandon Beavers returned home and spoke briefly with investigators. Police confirmed that he and other family members were fully cooperating with the investigation. By Friday, April 22, the case had gained national attention. The unusual circumstances, an early morning attack by someone dressed in tactical gear, in a church, with no apparent motive, captured public interest. The police released additional footage showing more of the suspect's movements within the church. In the weeks that followed, investigators pursued numerous leads. They examined Missy's personal life, her social media accounts, her phone records, and conducted extensive interviews with family, friends, and acquaintances. They analyzed the limited physical evidence found at the scene and consulted with experts on the tactical gear worn by the suspect. One potentially significant lead emerged on April 27, when police announced they were looking for information about a 2010 to 2012 model Nissan Altima or similar vehicle that had been captured on surveillance cameras in the area around the time of the murder. The car was seen driving around business parks near the church between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. on the morning of April 18. By June 2016, despite following up on hundreds of tips, interviewing dozens of people, and consulting with the FBI, investigators had not identified the person in tactical gear or made any arrests. The case remained active but increasingly challenging. Throughout the summer and fall of 2016, occasional updates from the police indicated the investigation was ongoing, but no breakthroughs were announced. The community held vigils and fundraisers for the Beavers family while speculation continued about who could have committed such a crime and why. As we continue our quiet exploration of this case, let's consider some of the theories that have emerged over the years since Missy Beavers' death. I'll present these thoughtfully, remembering that behind every theory are real people who continue to grieve and seek answers. The first theory involves a targeted attack. Some investigators have suggested that the person in tactical gear came specifically for Missy. The evidence supporting this theory includes the timing. The suspect arrived well before Missy but waited in the building rather than leaving. Additionally, nothing was reported stolen from the church, suggesting robbery wasn't the motive. If this was indeed a targeted attack, the question becomes, why Missy? Investigators explored her personal and professional connections, looking for anyone who might have harbored ill will toward her. While every life contains complications and conflicts, nothing substantial emerged that would explain such violence. Some have suggested financial motives, noting that the Beavers family had, like many American families, experienced some financial strain. Life insurance policies were examined, but nothing unusual was found that would point to this as a motive. The second major theory suggests a random encounter with a disturbed individual. Under this theory, the person in tactical gear broke into the church for other reasons, perhaps planning a robbery or simply engaged in vandalism, and attacked Missy when she unexpectedly arrived. The seemingly aimless wandering captured on surveillance footage could support this theory. However, the tactical outfit presents complications for this theory. Such gear suggests planning and purpose rather than opportunistic crime. Why would someone breaking into a church dress in such a distinctive manner? And if the intent was burglary, why were no items reported missing? A third theory centers on mistaken identity. Perhaps the attacker was targeting someone else who regularly used the church early in the morning and was unaware that Missy would be there for a one-time class. The placement of the class had only been decided the previous evening due to rain, which wasn't widely known outside Missy's fitness group. Law enforcement has also considered whether the attack might have been committed by a woman rather than a man, as initially assumed. The height of the suspect, estimated between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 7 inches, and certain aspects of their movement have led some investigators to believe a female suspect is possible. This would be unusual in such a violent crime but not unprecedented. The distinctive walk of the person in tactical gear, with a noticeable swing or shuffle of the right leg, has been a focus of investigation. Some have suggested this could indicate a medical condition or previous injury. Others have wondered if it might be an affected walk, deliberately altered to disguise the person's normal gait. The choice of tactical gear with police markings raises additional questions. Was this meant to provide a sense of authority if confronted? Was it chosen to explain the person's presence if seen near the church? Or did it hold some other significance to the attacker? The vehicle of interest, the Nissan Altima or similar car seen in the area, has never been definitively connected to the crime. Yet its presence in the early morning hours, circling nearby business parks, remains unexplained. Digital forensics has played a role in the investigation as well. Missy's electronic communications were thoroughly examined, including social media activity, emails, and text messages. While some pointed to concerning messages she had allegedly received in the weeks before her death, police have never confirmed these as relevant to the case. As years have passed since that April morning, the investigation has continued, though with decreasing public updates. Cold case experts have been consulted, evidence has been re-examined with new technologies, and tips continue to be evaluated. Yet the case remains unsolved. As of this recording, the murder of Missy Beavers remains unsolved. More than 5 years have passed since that rainy April morning in 2016, yet no arrests have been made, and the identity of the person in tactical gear remains unknown. The Midlothian Police Department maintains that this is still an active investigation. In periodic updates, they have confirmed that they continue to receive and follow up on tips from the public. In 2021, on the 5th anniversary of Missy's death, they reaffirmed their commitment to solving the case and bringing justice to the Beavers family. The FBI has provided ongoing assistance with the investigation, contributing resources and expertise beyond what was available to the local department. Various pieces of evidence have been re-examined as forensic technologies have advanced, though no publicly announced breakthroughs have resulted. Brandon Beavers and the couple's daughters have continued with their lives while carrying the weight of this unresolved tragedy. Brandon has largely avoided media attention in recent years, focusing instead on his family. The community of Midlothian has been supportive, respecting their privacy while remembering Missy's contributions to the lives she touched. Annual remembrances are held in Missy's honor, often organized by members of the fitness community where she was so beloved. These gatherings celebrate her life and legacy rather than focusing on the circumstances of her death. The case has been featured on various true crime programs and podcasts, keeping public awareness alive and occasionally generating new tips for investigators. Some amateur sleuths continue to discuss theories online, though this has sometimes led to unhelpful speculation about innocent individuals. A reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction remains available, having grown through contributions from law enforcement agencies, the community, and Missy's family. The exact amount has varied over time but represents the ongoing desire for resolution. For now, the rain-soaked morning of April 18, 2016, remains shrouded in mystery. The figure in tactical gear continues to haunt the hallways of the Creekside Church of Christ in surveillance footage that has been viewed countless times by investigators and the public alike. Perhaps someday, someone will come forward with the crucial piece of information that brings clarity to this case. Until then, Missy Beavers' story reminds us of the fragility of life and the enduring nature of a community's quest for justice. As we conclude on this case, the gentle rain continues to fall, much as it did on that April morning in Midlothian. We've walked through the known facts of Missy Beaver's case, considering the circumstances, the theories, and the ongoing search for answers. Missy was more than the subject of a mystery. She was a mother, a wife, a daughter, a friend, and a woman who dedicated herself to helping others improve their lives through fitness and encouragement. Her legacy lives on in the memories of those who knew her and in the continued efforts to find justice. As you drift toward sleep tonight, I hope you'll carry not the darkness of this story, but rather an appreciation for the delicate threads that connect us all in community, and perhaps a quiet hope that resolution may still come for those who continue to seek answers. Thank you for joining me tonight. If you found this exploration meaningful, please consider supporting the channel so we can continue these thoughtful journeys together. And don't forget to comment where you are listening from the current time in your corner of the world. Now let's move on to our next story. Story 3. Lake Geneva isn't just any small town in Wisconsin. Nestled against the northern shore of Geneva Lake, it has long been known as the Newport of the West, a reference to the famous Rhode Island coastal resort. Since the late 1800s, wealthy Chicago families have built magnificent summer homes along these shores, seeking refuge from the city's heat and bustle. Names like Wrigley, Schwinn, and Maytag, families that built American industries, all established grand estates here, with sweeping lawns that rolled down to meet the crystal-clear waters of the lake. By 1997, Lake Geneva had evolved into a year-round community of about 7,000 residents. The permanent population was a mix of those who maintained the estates, ran the local businesses, and managed the tourism that had become the lifeblood of the area. But come September, as the leaves began their transformation into brilliant hues of amber and crimson, the summer crowds had dwindled. The tourist season was winding down, and a certain tranquility had returned to the lakeside community. The Wrigley Estate, situated on the northwestern shore of the lake, was particularly magnificent, a sprawling property featuring a 14,000-square-foot main house built in 1911, boasting white columns and expansive terraces overlooking the water. The property included several outbuildings, a caretaker's cottage, a boathouse that could shelter 3 vessels, and a separate garage structure. By late September, the family had returned to their primary residence in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, leaving the estate vacant until the following spring. Thomas Milligan had worked as a groundskeeper in Lake Geneva for nearly 30 years. At 58, his weathered face and calloused hands told the story of a life spent tending to the estates of the wealthy. He wasn't bitter about this arrangement, far from it. Thomas took immense pride in his work and had developed a particular fondness for the Wrigley property, which he had maintained for the past 15 years. Sunday mornings were Thomas's time for property checks during the off-season. He preferred the quiet of early morning, when mist often hung over the lake and the only sounds were the occasional calls of waterfowl. On Sunday, September 28, 1997, Thomas arrived at the Wrigley Estate just after 7:30 a.m. The morning was crisp, with temperatures hovering around 52 degrees, cool enough for the light jacket he wore as he made his rounds of the property. Thomas always followed the same routine. He would walk the perimeter of the main house, checking doors and windows, then proceed to the outbuildings, ending with the boathouse down by the water. Nothing seemed amiss as he completed his check of the main house and made his way toward the boathouse, a handsome structure of stone and dark wood that matched the architectural style of the main residence. As he approached the boathouse, Thomas immediately noticed something unusual. The heavy wooden cellar door that led to the storage area beneath the boathouse was slightly ajar. Thomas was meticulous about securing all doors and windows, particularly with the approaching winter months. He distinctly remembered checking this door the previous Sunday and confirming it was locked. "That's odd," Thomas muttered to himself as he carefully pulled the door open wider. The hinges creaked softly, a sound that seemed to echo across the still morning air. Inside, the cellar was dark, illuminated only by the thin shaft of morning light now streaming through the open door. Thomas reached for his flashlight, a habit from years of checking dark spaces, and directed the beam into the shadowy interior. At first glance, nothing seemed disturbed. The space was primarily used for storing boating equipment during the winter months, life jackets, water skis, and various tools hung neatly on wall hooks. But as Thomas swept his flashlight across the floor, he noticed footprints in the thin layer of dust, fresh footprints that certainly hadn't been there the week before. Thomas was not an anxious man by nature, but something about those footprints made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. They led toward the interior stairs that connected the cellar to the boathouse above. With cautious steps, Thomas followed the trail, ascending the wooden staircase that opened into the main boathouse area. The boathouse was a cathedral-like space with high wooden beams and large doors that opened directly onto the water, allowing boats to be guided into their slips inside the structure. During the summer months, the Wrigley family kept 3 boats here, a vintage wooden Chris-Craft runabout, a modern pontoon boat for larger gatherings, and a small sailboat. But now, in late September, only the Chris-Craft remained, covered with a custom tarp, waiting out the winter months. Thomas played his flashlight around the space, noting that something was definitely amiss. In the far corner, near a small sitting area where the family would sometimes enjoy drinks while watching the sunset over the lake, there were clear signs of disturbance. A cushion had been moved from the built-in window seat, a throw blanket that was usually stored in a cedar chest had been left in a rumpled heap, and there were food wrappers, a candy bar and what looked like a sandwich wrapper from a local deli, discarded on a small side table. "Someone's been staying here," Thomas whispered to himself, his breath visible in the cool morning air. The boathouse wasn't heated during the off-season, but it provided shelter from the elements and was certainly more comfortable than sleeping outdoors. Thomas continued his inspection, climbing the narrow spiral staircase that led to a small loft area above the main boathouse floor. This space, sometimes used by the Wrigley grandchildren as a play area during summer visits, contained more evidence of an uninvited guest. A makeshift bed had been created from cushions pulled from storage, and a sleeping bag, not belonging to the family, was neatly rolled in one corner. Several books were stacked beside it, along with a leather-bound notebook, a pen resting across its open pages. Thomas didn't touch anything further. Instead, he retreated down the stairs and outside, pulling his cell phone from his pocket. This was well beyond the usual trespassing incident. Occasionally local teenagers would sneak onto the lakefront properties for nighttime swims. This appeared to be someone actually living in the boathouse, at least temporarily. Thomas dialed the Lake Geneva Police Department, explaining the situation to the dispatcher in his characteristically calm manner. "Yes, this is Thomas Milligan at the Wrigley Estate on North Lake Shore Drive," he said, his voice steady. "I need to report a break-in at the boathouse. No, I don't think anyone is here now, but someone has definitely been staying here. Yes, I'll wait outside until officers arrive." Within 20 minutes, a Lake Geneva Police Department cruiser pulled up the long driveway, gravel crunching beneath its tires. Detective Sarah Holloway emerged from the driver's side, while Officer Mark Reeves exited the passenger seat. At 42, Detective Holloway had served with the department for nearly 15 years and had developed a reputation for thoroughness and keen observation. Officer Reeves, 29, had been with the force for just under 5 years but had already distinguished himself as particularly good with community relations. "Morning, Thomas," Detective Holloway greeted the groundskeeper with a familiar nod. Many of the year-round residents knew each other in Lake Geneva, and Holloway had worked with Thomas on previous incidents involving the lakefront properties, though those had typically been minor vandalism or trespassing cases. "Sarah," Thomas nodded in return. "Thanks for coming out so quickly. Everything's just as I found it. Haven't touched a thing in the boathouse." "Good man," Holloway replied. "Why don't you show us what you found, and then we'll take it from there." Thomas led the 2 officers down the sloping lawn toward the boathouse, explaining his discovery of the unlocked cellar door and the signs of habitation he had found inside. Detective Holloway listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions, while Officer Reeves took notes in a small spiral notebook. Upon reaching the boathouse, Detective Holloway instructed Officer Reeves to take photographs of the cellar door and the footprints inside before they proceeded further. "Let's document everything as we go," she said, her experienced eyes already scanning the area around the entrance for additional evidence. The trio made their way through the cellar and up into the main boathouse space, with Detective Holloway now leading the way. Her trained eye immediately confirmed Thomas's suspicions. Someone had indeed been using the space as temporary living quarters. "How often do you check this building, Thomas?" she asked, carefully examining the food wrappers without touching them. "Every Sunday morning," Thomas replied. "And I was definitely here last week, same time." The door was locked, and there was none of this. "Whoever it was, they've been here sometime in the past 7 days." Detective Holloway nodded, then directed Officer Reeves to continue photographing the evidence. "Let's check the loft," she said, already moving toward the spiral staircase. In the loft, Detective Holloway studied the makeshift sleeping area with particular interest. The books stacked near the sleeping bag were an eclectic mix: a history of Lake Geneva, a technical manual on diving procedures, and a book about Prohibition-era Chicago. But it was the leather notebook that captured her attention most fully. "Mark, get some gloves from the car," she instructed Officer Reeves. "I want to take a look at this notebook without contaminating any potential fingerprints." While Officer Reeves jogged back to the cruiser, Detective Holloway continued her examination of the loft space. "Thomas, have the Wrigleys mentioned lending the boathouse to anyone? Any family friends or researchers who might have permission to be here?" Thomas shook his head firmly. "No, ma'am. Mr. Wrigley was quite clear that no one was to use the property until the family returns next spring. I have contact numbers if you'd like to call them directly." "We may need to do that," Holloway nodded, "but let's gather a bit more information first." When Officer Reeves returned with latex gloves, Detective Holloway carefully opened the notebook, turning pages with deliberate care. Inside were handwritten notes, diagrams of the lake with specific coordinates marked, and repeated references to something called the Sinclair Collection. Several pages contained calculations and measurements, while others held what appeared to be historical notes about Lake Geneva during the 1920s and early 1930s. "This isn't random," Detective Holloway murmured, more to herself than to her companions. "Whoever was staying here was researching something specific about the lake." She turned to another page, finding a carefully drawn map of the lake bottom near the Wrigley estate, with depths and landmarks noted with remarkable precision. "Thomas, does the name Sinclair Collection mean anything to you? Anything to do with the Wrigley family or this property?" Thomas considered the question for a moment before slowly shaking his head. "No, nothing I've ever heard mentioned. The family doesn't really talk much about the property's history, at least not with the staff." Detective Holloway nodded, continuing to examine the notebook. "Someone's gone to a lot of trouble here. This isn't just a transient looking for shelter." She carefully closed the notebook and placed it in an evidence bag that Officer Reeves held open for her. "Let's finish processing the scene, then we'll need to canvass the neighboring properties. Someone might have seen our mysterious visitor." By mid-afternoon, Detective Holloway and Officer Reeves had completed their examination of the boathouse, collecting the notebook, food wrappers for potential DNA evidence, and several other items left behind by the intruder. They had also spoken with owners and caretakers of the neighboring properties, though these interviews had yielded little information of value. The exception was Eleanor Wellington, a 76-year-old widow who lived year-round in a modest but elegant home 2 properties away from the Wrigley estate. When asked if she had noticed anything unusual in the past week, Mrs. Wellington had paused, tilting her head slightly as if trying to recall something just beyond her immediate memory. "You know," she had said finally, "I did see lights in the Wrigley boathouse one evening earlier this week. Tuesday, I believe it was. I remember because it was my bridge night, and I was looking out at the lake before my friends arrived." "What time would that have been?" Detective Holloway had asked. "Around 6:30, just as it was getting dark. I noticed it because it seemed odd, just a faint glow from the windows, not the bright lights you'd see if the family was using the space for entertaining. I assumed perhaps Thomas or another worker was doing some maintenance and didn't think much more about it." This was the only significant lead they had found during their canvassing effort. Most of the neighboring properties were already closed for the season, their owners having returned to their primary residences in Chicago or Milwaukee. Back at the Lake Geneva Police Department, Detective Holloway sat at her desk, the leather notebook open before her. With more time to examine its contents carefully, she was becoming increasingly intrigued by what she found. The notes were meticulous, scholarly even, with references to historical sources and archives. The writer had been conducting serious research into Lake Geneva's Prohibition-era history, with particular focus on rumored smuggling operations that had used the lake to transport illegal alcohol from Canada to Chicago. The name, Sinclair, appeared repeatedly, and through cross-referencing with the department's historical archives, Holloway discovered that Vincent Sinclair had been a notorious Chicago gangster with connections to Al Capone's organization. According to local legend, Sinclair had used Lake Geneva as both a retreat and a smuggling route, supposedly owning a small cabin on the North Shore during the late 1920s. More intriguing were the notebook's references to the collection, apparently referring to valuables that Sinclair had allegedly hidden somewhere near or in the lake when federal authorities had closed in on his operation in 1931. The notebook's author had assembled newspaper clippings, historical accounts, and local rumors to build a case for the collection's existence and its possible location, which, according to the writer's calculations, was somewhere in the waters directly offshore from the Wrigley estate. "This is about a treasure hunt," Detective Holloway murmured to herself, turning to yet another page filled with diving coordinates and water depths. Our mystery visitor wasn't just squatting, they were using the boathouse as a base for searching the lake. The next logical step was clear: they needed to identify the notebook's owner. Holloway arranged for the evidence to be processed for fingerprints and DNA, though she knew results would take time. In the meantime, she decided to check missing persons reports from the surrounding area, on a hunch that someone engaged in this level of research might have been reported missing if they had suddenly disappeared while pursuing their lake investigation. The following morning, Detective Holloway's hunch proved correct. While reviewing recent missing persons bulletins from neighboring jurisdictions, she discovered a report filed with the Chicago Police Department regarding a 34-year-old history professor named Michael Caldwell. Caldwell had been reported missing by his department chair at Northwestern University when he failed to appear for scheduled classes 3 weeks earlier. The report included a photograph of Caldwell, a slender man with dark-rimmed glasses and a thoughtful expression, along with personal details. Most significantly, Caldwell specialized in Midwestern history during the Prohibition era and had recently been researching connections between Chicago crime syndicates and their operations in Wisconsin. "This can't be a coincidence," Detective Holloway said to Officer Reeves as she showed him the report. "The specialization, the timing, I'd bet good money that this is our mystery researcher." Holloway immediately contacted the Chicago Police Department, speaking with Detective Luis Ramirez, who was handling Caldwell's case. She explained their discovery at the Wrigley estate and the notebook's contents, suggesting a possible connection. "We've been treating it as a standard missing persons case," Detective Ramirez explained. Caldwell lived alone, no spouse or children. His colleagues reported he'd become increasingly withdrawn in recent months, focused intensely on his research. His department chair became concerned when he missed several classes without explanation, apparently very out of character for him. "Would it be possible to get handwriting samples?" Holloway asked. "We have extensive notes in this notebook, and I'd like to confirm if they match Caldwell's handwriting." "I can do better than that," Ramirez replied. "We have samples from his office, and I can email scans to you immediately." Also, his apartment showed signs that he was planning a trip, clothes and personal items missing, though he hadn't mentioned travel plans to colleagues. "Given what you found, Lake Geneva seems like a likely destination." Within hours, Detective Holloway had received scans of Caldwell's handwriting from his office notes and class materials. The comparison was conclusive: the handwriting in the leather notebook matched Caldwell's distinctive script perfectly. They now had a name for their mysterious visitor, but Michael Caldwell himself was still missing. A deeper search of the boathouse and surrounding grounds yielded no further clues as to Caldwell's whereabouts. There was no sign of violence or struggle, and the careful way his sleeping bag had been rolled suggested he had left the boathouse deliberately rather than in haste or under duress. Detective Holloway decided to expand the investigation, focusing on the lake itself given the notebook's emphasis on underwater locations. She contacted the Walworth County Sheriff's Department, which maintained a small dive team for lake emergencies and recoveries. "We have a situation that might require underwater search capabilities," she explained to Sheriff Deputy Marcus Thompson, who coordinated the dive team. "We're looking for either a missing person or evidence related to their activities in Lake Geneva, specifically in the waters off the Wrigley estate." Deputy Thompson agreed to assemble his team the following morning. "The weather's been good, so visibility should be reasonable," he said. "But I should warn you, the lake is over 140 feet deep in some areas, and the bottom topography is complex." "What exactly are we looking for?" "That's the challenge," Holloway admitted. "Primarily, we're looking for any sign of recent diving activity or disturbance. The missing person we're investigating seems to have been searching for something in the lake, possibly historical artifacts. According to his notes, he was focusing on an area about 200 yards offshore from the Wrigley boathouse." The dive team assembled at 8 a.m. the next morning, a Wednesday, at the lakefront adjacent to the Wrigley estate. The team consisted of 4 experienced divers, led by Deputy Thompson, equipped with underwater communication devices and cameras to document anything they might find. Detective Holloway and Officer Reeves were present, along with Thomas Milligan, who had offered to help identify any areas where he might have observed unusual activity in recent weeks. The morning was clear and cool, the lake's surface like glass, reflecting the surrounding autumn foliage in a mirror image of red and gold. Under different circumstances, it would have been a scene of perfect tranquility. The dive team entered the water shortly after 8:30 a.m., following the coordinates Detective Holloway had extracted from Caldwell's notebook. The divers would be working in buddy pairs, maintaining constant contact with the surface via a communication system operated from the Sheriff's Department boat. "The water's clear today," Deputy Thompson's voice crackled over the radio after the team had been below for about 15 minutes. "Visibility is about 20 feet. We're at the first coordinate point now, proceeding with a standard search pattern." Detective Holloway stood at the edge of the Wrigley dock, watching the bubbles that marked the divers' positions approximately 200 yards out. The anticipation was palpable. Would they find evidence of Caldwell's underwater activities, or perhaps even Caldwell himself? "We've got something," Thompson's voice broke the silence nearly 40 minutes into the search. "There's a small wreck down here, looks like an old motorboat, maybe 30 feet long. Probably been here for decades. But here's the interesting part, there are signs of recent disturbance. The silt around part of the wreck has been cleared away, and there's a modern diving mask caught on one of the exposed ribs of the boat hull." Holloway felt her pulse quicken. "Can you retrieve the mask?" "Already doing so," Thompson replied. "Jenkins is bagging it now. There's something else, looks like someone was trying to access the cabin area of the wreck. There's a cleared path through the silt leading to what would have been the main cabin door." The diving mask retrieved by the team provided their first tangible connection to Michael Caldwell. A manufacturer's serial number on the frame allowed them to trace the purchase to a Chicago diving supply store, where records confirmed Caldwell had purchased the mask, along with a complete set of diving equipment, just over a month earlier. He wasn't an experienced diver, the store owner told Detective Holloway when she called to follow up. "I remember him because he asked a lot of questions, said he was doing research that required some underwater examination. I suggested he hire a professional or at least take some lessons, but he seemed in a hurry, said he'd taught himself the basics from books and videos." This information added a troubling dimension to the case. Solo diving, particularly for a novice, was extremely dangerous, especially in a lake as deep as Geneva, with underwater structures that could create hazardous situations for even experienced divers. Detective Holloway requested a more comprehensive search of the lake area surrounding the wreck. The next morning, the dive team returned with additional equipment, including side-scan sonar to help map the lake bottom more thoroughly. "We need to expand the search perimeter," she instructed Deputy Thompson. If Caldwell was diving alone and ran into trouble, he could be anywhere within a significant radius of that wreck site. The expanded search began under overcast skies that threatened rain, the first poor weather since the investigation had begun. The dive team methodically swept the area with the side-scan sonar before sending divers down to investigate anything unusual that appeared on the readings. Shortly after noon, the sonar operator called Detective Holloway to the monitor. "We've got something you should see," he said, pointing to an anomaly on the screen. "There's what appears to be a human form in about 70 feet of water, approximately 100 yards east of the wreck site." The dive team repositioned their boat over the location and sent 2 divers down to investigate. The surface team waited in tense silence, the only sounds the gentle lapping of waves against the boat hull and the sporadic crackle of the radio. 20 minutes later, the radio came to life with Deputy Thompson's grave voice. "Detective, we've found him. Adult male, dive equipment still in place. No obvious signs of trauma, but we'll need the medical examiner to make that determination. We're bringing him up now." Detective Holloway closed her eyes briefly, a moment of respect for the life lost. Though she had suspected this outcome from the moment they discovered the diving mask, confirmation still carried its own weight of sadness. "Understood," she replied simply. "We'll be ready." The recovery was handled with dignity and professionalism, the dive team carefully bringing Michael Caldwell's body to the surface and transferring him to the medical examiner's boat that had been called to the scene. Detective Holloway observed the proceedings from the dock, noting that Caldwell was still wearing complete diving gear, tank, wetsuit, weight belt, and fins. Whatever had happened to him had occurred during his dive, not beforehand. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment, conducted later that day, indicated drowning as the likely cause of death, with no signs of foul play or trauma beyond what would be consistent with a diving accident. A more detailed examination would follow, but the initial findings aligned with what the investigation had begun to suggest. Michael Caldwell, an amateur diver pursuing historical research, had likely experienced some kind of equipment failure or disorientation while exploring the wreck alone. A search of the surrounding area eventually located Caldwell's vehicle, a 2014 Honda Civic, hidden in a wooded area about a mile from the Wrigley estate. Inside were additional research materials, diving equipment manuals, and a laptop computer. The computer's contents further illuminated Caldwell's fixation on Vincent Sinclair and the rumored collection of valuables supposedly hidden in Lake Geneva. According to Caldwell's research, Vincent Sinclair had been tipped off about an impending federal raid in 1931 and had attempted to hide evidence of his illegal activities, including a substantial collection of cash, jewelry, and other valuables accumulated during his criminal career. Local legend held that Sinclair had used a boat to transport his ill-gotten gains to a secret location on or in the lake, intending to retrieve them once the federal investigation had subsided. However, Sinclair had been arrested before he could recover his hidden treasure, and he had died in prison in 1934 without ever revealing its location. Over the decades, the story had acquired the status of local legend, occasionally prompting amateur treasure hunters to search the shoreline or shallow waters of the lake, but never with any success. What set Caldwell's research apart was its academic rigor. He had spent months cross-referencing historical accounts, property records, and even weather reports from 1931 to narrow down the most likely location for Sinclair's hidden valuables. His research had led him to believe that Sinclair had used a motorboat to transport the collection, but had encountered mechanical problems during a storm. According to Caldwell's theory, Sinclair had been forced to sink the boat in deep water, intending to retrieve the valuables later using diving equipment, a plan foiled by his arrest. The wreck discovered by the dive team matched the description and approximate age of the type of boat Sinclair would have used. Caldwell had apparently located it through painstaking research and had been secretly diving to the wreck site, using the vacant Wrigley boathouse as his base of operations. He became obsessed with solving a historical mystery, Detective Holloway explained to Officer Reeves as they reviewed the case files a week later. And that obsession ultimately cost him his life. Did he ever find anything? Was there actually treasure in that wreck? Reeves asked. Holloway shook her head. The dive team did a thorough examination of the wreck after recovering Caldwell's body. They found no evidence of valuables or anything that could be part of the collection Caldwell was seeking. The cabin area he had been trying to access was empty except for some deteriorated mechanical equipment. So it was all for nothing, Reeves said quietly. That's the tragedy of it, Holloway agreed. He died pursuing a mystery that may never have been real to begin with, just a Prohibition-era legend that grew with each retelling. In the weeks that followed, the full story of Michael Caldwell and his obsessive quest came into clearer focus. Interviews with his colleagues at Northwestern revealed a brilliant but increasingly isolated man who had become consumed by his research into Lake Geneva's Prohibition connections. What had begun as an academic interest had evolved into something more personal, almost a crusade to validate local historical legends through concrete discovery. Caldwell had requested a sabbatical for the following spring semester but had apparently decided not to wait, instead taking unauthorized leave to pursue his Lake Geneva investigation. He had withdrawn a significant amount of money from his savings account to purchase diving equipment and fund his expedition, despite having no formal training as a diver. It's not uncommon for academics to become deeply invested in their research, explained Dr. Eleanor Harrington, the chair of Northwestern's history department and Caldwell's immediate supervisor. But Michael crossed a line between professional interest and personal obsession. Several colleagues tried to encourage him to step back, to pursue his theories through proper academic channels, but he became convinced that he alone had discovered the key to finding Sinclair's lost collection. Caldwell's family, a sister in Seattle and parents in Florida, were notified of his death. They expressed shock at the circumstances, saying they had been aware of his historical research but had no idea he had taken up diving or was engaged in potentially dangerous activities. He was always so cautious, so methodical, his sister told Detective Holloway during a phone interview. The idea of him diving alone, especially as a beginner, it's so out of character for the brother I knew. Lake Geneva's small community newspaper published a modest article about the incident, focusing primarily on the historical aspects of Caldwell's research rather than the tragic circumstances of his death. Local interest in the Prohibition-era connections to the lake experienced a brief resurgence, with the town's historical society reporting increased inquiries about Vincent Sinclair and other Chicago gangsters who had used the lake region as a retreat during the 1920s and early 1930s. In a gesture that brought some meaning to the tragedy, Caldwell's family donated his research materials, including the leather notebook found in the Wrigley Boathouse, to the Lake Geneva Historical Society. His meticulous work, though it had led him down a perilous path, represented a valuable contribution to the documented history of the region during a colorful and significant period of American history. The following spring, a small memorial bench was placed near the lake's edge in Library Park, bearing a simple bronze plaque, in memory of Michael Caldwell, scholar and explorer of Lake Geneva's hidden history. The bench faced the waters where Caldwell had made his final dive, though few of the tourists who would eventually sit there to admire the view would know the story behind its placement. Detective Sarah Holloway visited the bench occasionally during her off-duty hours, finding it a peaceful spot for reflection. The case had affected her more deeply than many others in her career, perhaps because of the particular poignancy of someone dying in pursuit of knowledge, in search of tangible proof of a historical footnote. The waters of Lake Geneva hold many secrets, she often thought during these visits. Some are meant to stay beneath the surface. Whether Sinclair's collection had ever existed, whether it still lay somewhere in the murky depths of the lake or was nothing more than Prohibition-era folklore, these questions would likely never be answered with certainty. Thomas Milligan continued his dutiful maintenance of the Wrigley estate, though he now approached the boathouse with a certain reverence that hadn't been present before. The following summer, when the family returned for their annual residence, he never mentioned the incident to them, feeling it would somehow tarnish the property's peaceful atmosphere. The boathouse remained as it had always been, a place of summer laughter and sunset gatherings, its brief role in the tragic story fading like ripples on the lake's surface. Lake Geneva itself continued its centuries-old cycle of seasons, summer crowds giving way to autumn's blazing colors, winter's crystalline stillness, and spring's renewal. Beneath its waters, the old motorboat wreck settled deeper into the silt, its connection to both Prohibition-era smuggling and modern tragedy gradually obscured by time and the lake's natural processes. As for whether Vincent Sinclair's collection truly exists somewhere in or around Lake Geneva, that mystery remains unsolved, waiting perhaps for another researcher to piece together the historical puzzle. But if such a person emerges, one can hope they will pursue their quest with greater caution than Michael Caldwell, remembering that some historical mysteries exact a terrible price for their solutions. And so our story comes to its end, as rain continues to fall gently outside your window. The mysteries of Lake Geneva, both solved and unsolved, drift away like the mist that often rises from the water in the early morning hours. Perhaps in your dreams tonight, you might visit those tranquil shores, watching as autumn leaves fall onto the still water, creating concentric ripples that spread outward until they disappear into the vastness of the lake. I hope this true crime tale has helped ease you toward restful sleep. The steady rain will continue to accompany you as you drift deeper into slumber, carrying away any lingering thoughts of the day. Story 4. The mysterious case of the Jack family, Ronald, Doreen, and their 2 young children, who vanished in 1989 after receiving promising job offers. Their story remains one of Canada's most perplexing unsolved mysteries, a case that has haunted investigators and the Indigenous community for decades. As the rain falls outside your window, let's journey back to the northern wilderness of British Columbia, where this family's story begins. The Jack family lived in the small community of Burns Lake, British Columbia. Ronald Jack was 26 years old, a member of the Cheslata Carrier Nation. His wife, Doreen Jack, was 26 as well, from the Lake Babine Nation. They had 2 young children, Russell, who was just 9 years old, and Ryan, only 4. They were a close-knit Indigenous family with deep connections to their community and heritage. Living in Burns Lake wasn't always easy for the family. The remote town, situated about 230 kilometers west of Prince George, offered limited economic opportunities. Ronald had worked various jobs to support his family, primarily in the forestry industry which was common in that heavily wooded region of northern British Columbia. The Jacks lived in modest circumstances, in a small home that reflected their financial situation. Yet by all accounts from friends and relatives, they were a loving family who took good care of one another. Ronald was described as a responsible father who was always looking for better opportunities to provide for his wife and sons. Burns Lake in the late 1980s was a typical northern Canadian town, surrounded by pristine wilderness, with an economy centered around natural resources. The community had strong Indigenous representation, with several First Nations groups maintaining cultural ties despite the challenges of modern life in remote northern Canada. The Jack family navigated both the Indigenous and non-Indigenous aspects of life in Burns Lake. Their children attended local schools, and the family was known in the community. Like many young families, they dreamed of stability and better prospects. Summer in northern British Columbia brings long daylight hours and relatively mild weather compared to the harsh winters. August 1989 was typical for the region, a time when many locals took advantage of the warm weather for outdoor activities before the inevitable return of snow and ice. For the Jack family, August 1989 likely began as an ordinary month. But an unexpected opportunity was about to change everything. On August 1, 1989, Ronald Jack made an excited phone call to his mother-in-law, Lillian Basil. The call came around 9:30 in the evening, not an unusual time in the northern summer when daylight lingered late into the evening. During this call, Ronald shared what seemed like wonderful news. He told Lillian that he had been offered a job at a logging camp or ranch in the Klukults Lake area, some distance from Burns Lake. According to Ronald, the position came with a salary of $1,000 per week, a substantial sum in 1989, particularly in rural British Columbia. This opportunity represented far more than just employment. For a young family struggling financially, such a position could be transformative. The job apparently included housing accommodations for the entire family, solving multiple problems at once. Doreen had also been offered work, likely in a cooking or housekeeping capacity at the same location. Ronald explained to his mother-in-law that they were planning to leave immediately, that very night. A man had offered to drive them to the work site, and they were preparing to depart. Ronald promised that once they were settled, they would call with their new contact information. This phone call to Lillian Basil represents the last verified communication from any member of the Jack family. The conversation, while brief, contained several details that would later become crucial to the investigation. Ronald mentioned a specific man had made the job offer. The family was leaving that night, suggesting urgency. The job was located near Klukelt's Lake. Both parents would be employed at this remote location. They were being transported by someone else. In the background during the call, Lillian could reportedly hear the voices of the children and Doreen. Everyone sounded normal, perhaps even excited about this new opportunity. Nothing in their voices suggested distress or concern. What we don't know is whether Ronald provided additional details about the job or the person who offered it. We also don't know if Lillian had any reservations about the sudden move or the unusual timing of their departure. After saying goodbye to Lillian, the Jack family seemingly vanished into the night. They were never seen or heard from again. The first days after a disappearance are often marked by uncertainty rather than alarm. Family members might assume communication difficulties or changes in plans rather than immediately suspecting something terrible has occurred. True to Ronald's word, Lillian Basil waited to hear from the family once they were settled. But no call ever came. Days passed, then a week, and concern began to grow among extended family members. The precise timing of when authorities were first notified is not entirely clear from the public record. In rural communities, especially those with indigenous populations who had historically complicated relationships with law enforcement, there could be hesitation to involve police immediately. What we do know is that by mid-August, it was clear something was wrong. The Jack family had not contacted any relatives. They hadn't been seen in Burns Lake or Klukelt's Lake. Their absence was becoming increasingly worrisome. When police were finally notified, the investigation into one of British Columbia's most perplexing disappearances began. When authorities were notified about the Jack family's disappearance, the response faced challenges common to missing persons cases. The family had voluntarily left Burns Lake, apparently for a job opportunity. Adults choosing to relocate don't immediately trigger intensive investigations. However, several factors quickly elevated concerns. The family included 2 young children. No contact had been made with any relatives. The job offer details were vague and couldn't be verified. No one in the Klukelt's Lake area reported seeing the family arrive. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, began making inquiries in both Burns Lake and the Klukelt's Lake area. They interviewed Lillian Basil to get details about the phone call and the job offer. They checked with local logging operations and ranches, but found no record of Ronald or Doreen Jack being hired. Investigators faced significant challenges from the beginning. The terrain between Burns Lake and Klukelt's Lake is vast and remote, with dense forests, numerous small lakes, and limited road access. The area where the family might have traveled encompassed hundreds of square kilometers of wilderness. As days turned into weeks with no sign of the family, the investigation expanded. Search parties combed areas around both communities. Investigators checked records of other logging operations throughout the region. They interviewed residents who might have seen the family or their transportation. Several challenges complicated the investigation. First, the exact location of the supposed job site was never clear. Klukelt's Lake area encompasses a large region with scattered properties and operations. Second, without knowing who had offered Ronald the job or who was transporting the family, investigators had no specific individuals to question. Third, in the pre-internet era of 1989, records were less centralized and communication between agencies more difficult. Fourth, the family had few possessions that could be tracked. No credit card trails, no cell phone records, no digital footprint that modern investigations might utilize. Despite these obstacles, the RCMP devoted significant resources to the case. They pursued various theories, from accident to foul play, following each lead methodically but finding little concrete evidence. As months passed without resolution, investigators developed several theories about what might have happened to the Jack family. One possibility was a vehicle accident in the remote terrain. If the family's transportation had gone off the road in an isolated area, it might not be discovered for years, especially if it was in water or deep brush. Another theory centered on the job offer itself. Could it have been fraudulent, a ruse to lure the family away from Burns Lake for nefarious purposes? The promised salary was unusually high for rural logging work in 1989, potentially raising suspicions in retrospect. Investigators also considered whether the family might have chosen to disappear, perhaps starting new lives elsewhere. However, this seemed unlikely given their close family connections and the lack of financial means to relocate far away unassisted. The most troubling theory, and the one that gained prominence as time passed, was that the family had encountered foul play. The scenario raised difficult questions. Who was the man who offered Ronald the job? Who was driving them that night? What was their actual destination? Without bodies, without witnesses, without physical evidence, the investigation reached impasse after impasse. The case became one of British Columbia's most enduring mysteries. As the 1990s progressed, the Jack family case remained open but with few new developments. The passage of time complicated the investigation further. Memories faded, potential witnesses moved away or passed away, and physical evidence, if it ever existed, degraded in the harsh northern environment. For the extended family, this period brought the painful transition from hoping for a safe return to acknowledging the likelihood of tragedy. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries arrived and departed, each a reminder of absence. Russell and Ryan would have grown from boys to teenagers, yet no one witnessed these changes. Periodic media coverage kept the case in the public consciousness. Anniversaries of the disappearance would typically generate newspaper articles or brief television segments, usually emphasizing the same key facts: the mysterious job offer, the nighttime departure, the complete absence of traces. The Jack family case became part of a larger, troubling pattern. Indigenous people, particularly in rural Canadian communities, seemed to disappear at disproportionate rates. Many of these cases received limited attention and resources, creating what some advocates would later call a crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people. By the early 2000s, investigators and the public began drawing connections between various disappearances along Highway 16, the east-west route that runs through northern British Columbia. This highway, stretching from Prince Rupert to Prince George and beyond, came to be known as the Highway of Tears, due to the numerous Indigenous women and girls who had disappeared along its route. While the Jack family case involved an entire family rather than a lone female traveler, some similarities existed. The geographic proximity, the involvement of Indigenous victims, and the complete lack of resolution connected these cases in the public mind. The Highway of Tears cases received increased attention as advocacy grew around missing and murdered Indigenous women. This renewed focus sometimes extended to the Jack family case, bringing periodic new inquiries and media coverage. However, the Jack family disappearance remained distinct in key ways. They weren't last seen on Highway 16 itself. They disappeared as a unit rather than as individuals. And they were reportedly last known to be traveling with someone for a specific purpose, the new job, rather than hitchhiking or traveling alone as was common in many Highway of Tears cases. As investigative techniques evolved through the 1990s and into the 2000s, cold case units occasionally revisited the Jack family disappearance. New technologies offered fresh approaches. Improved DNA analysis allowed comparison with unidentified remains. Digital mapping helped visualize possible routes and search areas. Computerized databases made cross-referencing other cases more efficient. Aging software could show how Russell and Ryan might have looked as they grew older. In 2014, 25 years after the disappearance, the RCMP made a renewed public appeal for information. They emphasized that even after all this time, someone might remember something, a detail about logging operations near Klukelt's Lake in 1989, a strange encounter on a remote road, an overheard conversation about a family being hired. Despite these efforts, definitive answers remained elusive. The Jack family had seemingly vanished without trace, no vehicle found, no remains discovered, no credible sightings reported in the decades since that August night in 1989. The disappearance of the Jack family must be understood within the broader context of Indigenous experiences in Canada. For many First Nations communities, the case represented not an isolated tragedy but part of a systemic pattern. Indigenous communities across Canada have long reported that missing persons cases involving their members receive less attention, fewer resources, and less media coverage. Historical tensions with law enforcement have complicated reporting and investigation processes. The Jack family case, with its complete absence of resolution, became emblematic of these concerns. Their story has been included in various advocacy efforts, reports, and commemorations of missing and murdered Indigenous people. The case also highlights the economic vulnerability that has affected many Indigenous families. The promise of well-paying work in a remote location, appealing enough to prompt a nighttime departure, reflects the limited opportunities available in communities like Burns Lake and the lengths to which families would go for financial stability. Despite the passing years, the Jack family is not forgotten. Their names are often included in ceremonies honoring missing Indigenous people. Their story is sometimes featured in documentaries about unsolved disappearances in British Columbia. For the Cheslata Carrier Nation and the Lake Babine Nation, the absence of closure has made traditional mourning practices difficult. Without known burial sites, without confirmation of death, the cultural protocols around loss cannot be fully observed. Family members have continued to speak about Ronald, Doreen, Russell, and Ryan over the years, sharing memories of who they were rather than focusing solely on their disappearance. These recollections help ensure that the family is remembered as people who lived and loved, not merely as victims in an unsolved case. Community gatherings on significant anniversaries have kept their memory alive while also serving as painful reminders of how much time has passed without answers. At these events, the ages the children would have reached, their teens, 20s, 30s, are sometimes mentioned, emphasizing the lives that should have been. As this story draws toward its close, the rain continuing to fall gently in the background, we must acknowledge that the Jack family case remains fundamentally unresolved. The central questions persist. Who offered Ronald Jack that promising job? Was it a legitimate opportunity or something else entirely? Who transported the family that August night, and to what actual destination? What happened after that final phone call to Lillian Basil? Most painfully, where are Ronald, Doreen, Russell, and Ryan now? The vast wilderness of northern British Columbia holds many secrets. Remote lakes and forests, logging roads rarely traveled, areas that might not see human presence for years at a time, all these could conceal evidence indefinitely. For investigators, for family members, and for the communities affected, the absence of closure is its own form of grief. The not knowing creates a perpetual limbo where hope, however faint, mingles with the growing acceptance of loss. As our rain-accompanied journey through this haunting case comes to an end, we're left with reflections rather than resolutions. The disappearance of the Jack family represents one of those mysteries that may never be fully solved, a case where the passage of time has obscured evidence but not diminished the importance of remembering. Cases like this one remind us of our human need for answers and closure. They also highlight how quickly and completely lives can vanish, leaving only questions and memories behind. The forests around Burns Lake and Klukelt's Lake remain largely as they were in 1989, vast, beautiful, and capable of keeping secrets across decades. Perhaps someday they will yield the answers that would bring peace to those who still wonder about the fate of Ronald, Doreen, Russell, and Ryan Jack. Until that day comes, their story continues to be told, as we have done tonight, ensuring that this family is not forgotten despite the unanswered questions surrounding their disappearance. As the rainfall continues to create its soothing rhythm, may you find peaceful rest, carrying with you a moment of remembrance for the Jack family. Story 5. Lake Serene sits hidden among rolling hills and dense forests, approximately 3 hours from Seattle. To reach this remote community, one must travel along winding roads that curve through tall stands of Douglas fir and western red cedar. The town itself consists of just a few streets, a main thoroughfare lined with modest storefronts, a handful of residential roads, and scattered cabins that extend outward into the surrounding woodland. For generations, logging sustained the economy of Lake Serene. The scent of freshly cut timber perpetually hung in the air, mixing with the earthy aroma of damp soil and pine needles. By the mid-1990s, the logging industry had begun to slow, and the town was gradually transitioning toward tourism, capitalizing on its natural beauty and opportunities for hiking, fishing, and camping. Despite these changes, Lake Serene maintained its character as a place where tradition and community bonds remained strong. It was in this setting that Michelle Carpenter built her life. At 28 years old, Michelle was known throughout town as the thoughtful, soft-spoken owner of Lakeside Books, a small but well-curated bookstore located in a converted Victorian house near the center of town. With her shoulder-length brown hair often pulled back in a practical ponytail and her preference for comfortable flannel shirts and hiking boots, Michelle embodied the practical, nature-loving spirit of the Pacific Northwest. Michelle had moved to Lake Serene 5 years earlier, drawn by the natural beauty and the opportunity to open her bookstore after inheriting a modest sum from her grandmother. Though not born in the community, she had been embraced as one of their own. Her bookstore became more than just a place to purchase reading material. It was a gathering spot where locals would stop by to discuss recent reads, share town news, or simply enjoy a cup of coffee by the small fireplace during the region's frequent rainy days. The residents of Lake Serene numbered just under 2,000 people. They were the type of community where unlocked doors were common and where someone would notice if your car wasn't parked in its usual spot. Sheriff Thomas Monroe had served the county for nearly 15 years and often joked that his job mainly consisted of settling minor disputes and occasionally rescuing tourists who had wandered off marked trails. Serious crime was rare, which made what happened to Michelle all the more shocking to everyone who lived there. Michelle's daily routine was well established. She would open her bookstore at 9 each morning, except on Mondays when the store was closed. She'd take a short lunch break at noon, often walking to the small diner down the street or bringing a packed lunch to eat in the small garden behind her shop. At 6 in the evening, she would close the store, sometimes staying a bit later to manage inventory or place new orders. Weekends followed a similar pattern, though she would close earlier on Sundays to join a small group of friends for dinner at the local tavern, a tradition they had maintained for years. When not working, Michelle could often be found hiking the numerous trails that surrounded Lake Serene. She was an experienced outdoorswoman who knew the local terrain well and always practiced proper safety measures. She carried a detailed map, compass, first aid kit, and enough supplies to manage an unexpected overnight stay if weather turned poor. Her friends described her as cautious but adventurous, someone who respected nature but wasn't afraid to explore it. Michelle lived alone in a small cabin about a mile from her bookstore, at the edge of town where the forest began to thicken. Her nearest neighbor, Eleanor Jenkins, was an elderly woman who had lived in Lake Serene her entire life. Eleanor later told investigators that Michelle was the perfect neighbor, friendly but respectful of privacy, always willing to help bring in groceries or check on Eleanor during power outages, which were common during winter storms. As September 1996 began, Michelle was looking forward to the changing season. She had decorated her bookstore with autumn-themed displays and had stocked up on mystery novels, which she told customers were perfect for the longer evenings ahead. She had recently started a hiking journal, meticulously documenting the trails she explored, the wildlife she encountered, and the photographs she took with her prized Nikon camera, a hobby she had developed over the past year. Nothing in Michelle's behavior during the weeks leading up to her disappearance suggested any concern or fear. Those who spoke with her described her as being in good spirits, excited about the upcoming fall season and the hiking opportunities it would bring before winter set in. She had been planning a more extensive hiking trip for the following spring and had maps spread out on the small table in the back of her bookstore, marking potential routes through the Cascade Mountains. Friday, September 17, 1996 began like any other autumn day in Lake Serene. A light morning fog clung to the surface of the water, gradually burning away as weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. Michelle Carpenter arrived at her bookstore at 8:40 a.m., 20 minutes before opening, as was her habit. She carried a cardboard tray with 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for Rebecca Winters, a part-time employee who helped on Fridays and Saturdays. According to Rebecca's later statements to investigators, Michelle seemed in good spirits that morning. She mentioned she was looking forward to her planned hike the next day on the Eagle Ridge Trail, a moderate 7-mile loop that offered spectacular views of the surrounding mountains and Lake Serene below. Michelle had hiked this trail several times before but told Rebecca she wanted to photograph the early autumn colors before they peaked. She was particularly excited about the light, Rebecca recalled. She said the forecast called for partly cloudy conditions, which would create interesting shadows on the hillsides. Photography had become a real passion for her over the past year. Throughout that Friday, several regular customers stopped by the bookstore. James Collier, a retired high school teacher, came in around 11 a.m. to pick up a special order, a collection of poetry he had requested the previous week. He chatted with Michelle for about 15 minutes, primarily discussing a local town council meeting that had taken place the night before regarding funding for road repairs. Collier would later tell investigators that Michelle seemed completely normal and mentioned her hiking plans casually. At 12:30 p.m., Michelle took her usual lunch break. Security footage from the local grocery store shows her purchasing a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. She exchanged brief pleasantries with the cashier, Donna Martinez, who remembered Michelle mentioning she was stocking up on trail mix and energy bars for her hike the next day. The afternoon at the bookstore was relatively busy for a small-town shop. A young couple who had recently moved to the area spent nearly an hour browsing and eventually purchased several novels and a regional hiking guide. Michelle helped a teenage student find research materials for a school project. Regular customer Margaret Thompson stopped by around 4 p.m. to return a book and chat for nearly 20 minutes about an upcoming book club selection. At 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes before closing time, Sheriff Thomas Monroe briefly stopped by the store. This wasn't unusual. The sheriff made a habit of checking in with local business owners, particularly as daylight hours grew shorter in the fall months. He would later recall that Michelle mentioned her hiking plans for the next day, and he reminded her to make sure someone knew her route and expected return time, standard safety advice he gave to all hikers in the area. Rebecca Winters left the store at 6 p.m. when they officially closed, but Michelle stayed behind to reconcile the day's receipts and prepare a bank deposit, her typical end-of-day routine. The last confirmed sighting of Michelle was by Peter Goldman, owner of the hardware store 2 doors down, who saw her locking the front door of her bookshop at approximately 6:25 p.m. He waved to her from across the street, and she waved back before walking toward her car parked in the small lot behind the row of businesses. What happened after Michelle left her bookstore that evening remains subject to speculation. Based on investigative findings and known routines, authorities believe she returned to her cabin, prepared equipment for her hiking trip, and went to bed. Her hiking backpack, which she typically kept in a closet near her front door, was not in her home when investigators eventually searched it. Her bed appeared to have been slept in, and a mug with dried tea residue sat on her bedside table. On Saturday, September 18th, Michelle was scheduled to begin her hike on Eagle Ridge Trail around 8 a.m. The trailhead was approximately 20 minutes from her cabin by car. The weather that morning was as predicted, partly cloudy with temperatures in the mid-60s, ideal conditions for hiking. Several other hikers were at the trailhead that morning, but none recalled specifically seeing Michelle, though this wasn't necessarily unusual given the staggered starting times of various hikers. When Sunday evening came and Michelle didn't appear for the weekly dinner with friends at the local tavern, mild concern began to spread among her social circle. Her close friend, Laura Bennett, called Michelle's home phone around 7:30 p.m. but received no answer. Laura reasoned that perhaps Michelle had extended her hiking trip to enjoy the good weather, or was simply tired after a long day outdoors and had decided to stay home. While unusual for Michelle to miss their standing dinner without calling, it wasn't entirely out of character for her to occasionally need quiet time alone. However, when Monday morning arrived and Michelle failed to open her bookstore, something she had never done without advance notice, concern deepened significantly. Rebecca Winters arrived at 8:45 a.m. to find the store still locked. After waiting 30 minutes, she called Laura Bennett, who then tried Michelle's home phone again with no success. Increasingly worried, Laura drove to Michelle's cabin around 10 a.m. Michelle's mail from Saturday remained in her mailbox. Looking through the windows, Laura could see no signs of disturbance, but also no signs of Michelle. After knocking repeatedly with no answer, Laura made a decision that would officially begin the investigation. She drove to the Eagle Ridge trailhead to check if Michelle's car was still there. The discovery of Michelle's blue Honda Civic, parked in the small gravel lot at the Eagle Ridge trailhead, transformed concern into alarm. A thin layer of dew and fallen pine needles covered the vehicle, suggesting it had been sitting undisturbed since Saturday morning. Laura immediately called Sheriff Monroe from the emergency phone at the ranger station near the trailhead. By early Monday afternoon, the weather had begun to shift. The pleasant conditions of the weekend gave way to dark clouds and increasingly heavy rainfall, common for the region but deeply concerning for search operations. As Sheriff Monroe arrived at the trailhead and confirmed the vehicle belonged to Michelle, he immediately requested search and rescue resources, knowing that time and deteriorating weather conditions were now serious factors in locating the missing woman. Sheriff Monroe's first step was to secure Michelle's vehicle and examine its contents. Inside, investigators found nothing unusual: a light jacket on the passenger seat, a park map in the side door pocket, and a small cooler in the trunk that contained an unopened water bottle. The car was locked, and there were no signs of forced entry or struggle in or around the vehicle. Michelle's wallet, identification, and house keys were not in the car, suggesting she had them with her on the trail, a common practice for hikers who might need identification in an emergency. As the first raindrops began to fall at the trailhead, Sheriff Monroe made a call that would mobilize one of the largest search operations in the county's history. The clock was ticking, and somewhere on the miles of rugged terrain that comprised Eagle Ridge Trail, Michelle Carpenter had vanished without a trace. By Monday afternoon, as the rain began to fall more steadily across Lake Serene, the search for Michelle Carpenter transformed from a casual concern into a full-scale operation. Sheriff Monroe had activated the county's search and rescue team, a mix of law enforcement officers and trained volunteers familiar with the challenging terrain of the region. Within 2 hours, 23 people had gathered at the Eagle Ridge trailhead, organizing into teams with assigned sections of the trail to cover. Park Ranger Daniel Hayes, who had worked in the Lake Serene National Forest for over 11 years, took a central role in coordinating the search efforts. His intimate knowledge of the area's topography, weather patterns, and potential hazards proved invaluable as teams prepared to head into the increasingly wet forest. The Eagle Ridge Trail presents specific challenges, Ranger Hayes explained to the assembled search teams. There are 3 main sections where hikers commonly stray from the marked path. The first is about 1.2 miles in, where an old logging trail intersects and often confuses hikers. The second is near the creek crossing around mile 3, where the trail becomes less distinct. The third is near the ridge viewpoint, where people sometimes follow game trails down the wrong side of the mountain. These insights shaped the initial search strategy. Teams were equipped with radios, first aid supplies, and detailed topographic maps marked with their assigned search zones. Meanwhile, Sheriff Monroe established a command post at the trailhead, coordinating communication between teams and documenting all findings. He also assigned a deputy to remain at Michelle's cabin, both to secure the location and to be present in case she returned home. The search began methodically, with teams calling Michelle's name at regular intervals and carefully examining the trail and surrounding areas for any signs of disturbance or evidence of her passing. Tracking was made significantly more difficult by the rainfall, which had steadily increased throughout the afternoon, washing away potential footprints and other subtle signs that might have indicated her path. By nightfall on Monday, the search had covered the main trail and several common offshoots without success. The teams found multiple hikers who had been on the trail that weekend, but none recalled seeing a woman matching Michelle's description. As darkness fell and the rain continued to intensify, Sheriff Monroe made the difficult decision to suspend the search until morning, knowing that searching the rugged terrain at night posed significant risks to the rescue teams. Early Tuesday morning, despite continuing rainfall, the search resumed with additional resources. The county had requested assistance from neighboring jurisdictions, bringing the total number of searchers to 42. A helicopter from the state police was placed on standby, though the low cloud ceiling and poor visibility prevented immediate aerial reconnaissance. At approximately 10:15 a.m. on Tuesday, the first significant discovery was made. Search Team B, consisting of Ranger Hayes and 4 volunteers, located what appeared to be a recently used rest area approximately 2.8 miles from the trailhead. Under a large western hemlock tree, partially protected from the rain, they found clear indications that someone had sat and possibly eaten a meal. A granola bar wrapper was discovered tucked under a rock, a common practice among environmentally conscious hikers to prevent litter from blowing away. The wrapper wasn't heavily weathered, Ranger Hayes noted in his report. Based on its condition, it had been there for no more than a few days, consistent with the timeline of Michelle's hike. While this discovery didn't definitively connect to Michelle, it established a potential path and timeline. The teams adjusted their search patterns accordingly, focusing more resources on the trails beyond this point. The most significant breakthrough came shortly after 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday. Search Team D, working approximately 3.2 miles from the trailhead and about a half-mile off the main trail, discovered Michelle's backpack wedged between 2 fallen logs in a small ravine. The location was puzzling. It wasn't on any established trail, nor was it at a natural rest point or viewpoint where a hiker might stop. Sheriff Monroe and Ranger Hayes immediately proceeded to the location to examine the discovery firsthand. The backpack was positively identified as Michelle's through personal items inside, including her wallet with identification, a small notebook with her name inscribed on the first page, and a prescription medication bottle with her name on the label. The condition of the backpack presented investigators with their first truly perplexing elements of the case. Though it had been exposed to nearly 2 days of rainfall, the interior contents remained relatively dry, suggesting the pack had been intentionally positioned under the partial cover of the fallen logs. Most of Michelle's hiking essentials were still inside: her first aid kit, trail map, compass, flashlight, extra clothing, approximately half of her food supplies, and a nearly full water bottle. Most notably absent was her camera, the Nikon she treasured and had specifically mentioned taking on this hike to photograph the early autumn colors. Also missing were her keys, both house and car, which she would typically secure in an interior zippered pocket of the backpack. The position and condition of the backpack doesn't align with typical scenarios we encounter, Ranger Hayes explained to Sheriff Monroe as they examined the scene. It wasn't simply dropped or lost during a fall. Its placement between these logs appears deliberate, almost as if it was meant to be protected from the elements or concealed from casual observation. Sheriff Monroe noted another unusual detail: there were no signs of animal disturbance to the food items in the pack, despite the area being home to numerous creatures that would typically be attracted to such scents. This further suggested the pack had not been there for long before its discovery, despite being found more than 2 full days after Michelle began her hike. As the team carefully documented and collected the backpack and its contents, they expanded the search radius around this critical location. The terrain in this area grew increasingly challenging: a section of forest with dense underbrush, several small seasonal streams swollen by the recent rainfall, and a gradient that increased sharply to the east toward one of the ridge's steeper faces. The discovery of the backpack transformed the nature of the investigation. What had begun as a search for a possibly injured or lost hiker now carried more troubling implications. The deliberate placement of the pack, the missing camera and keys, and the location well off the established trail all suggested scenarios beyond a simple hiking accident. Sheriff Monroe made two critical decisions that afternoon. First, he requested that state police investigators join the case, bringing additional expertise and resources. Second, he expanded the search parameters significantly, no longer assuming Michelle would be found on or near the established trails. As forensic technicians carefully examined the backpack and its contents for fingerprints, DNA, and other potential evidence, the search teams reorganized into a grid pattern centered on the backpack discovery site. The weather continued to work against them, with the rainfall increasing in intensity throughout the afternoon, reducing visibility and making the already challenging terrain treacherous in places. By Tuesday evening, the search had grown to include 58 individuals, including handlers with trained search dogs. Despite the expanded efforts and the critical discovery of the backpack, no further signs of Michelle were found. The dogs repeatedly lost potential scent trails, hampered by the persistent rainfall and the time that had elapsed since Michelle's disappearance. As darkness fell on the second full day of searching, Sheriff Monroe stood at the command post, reviewing maps and search patterns with Ranger Hayes and State Police Lieutenant Sarah Jameson, who had arrived with a team of 4 investigators. The rain drummed steadily on the roof of the small ranger station that served as their headquarters, a constant reminder of how quickly evidence could be washed away in this environment. "We're no longer just looking for a hiker," Sheriff Monroe said quietly to Lieutenant Jameson. "The evidence doesn't support a straightforward accident or disorientation scenario. We need to consider other possibilities." The investigation was evolving, becoming more complex with each passing hour. As search teams reluctantly suspended operations for the night, the questions surrounding Michelle Carpenter's disappearance multiplied. Where was her camera? Why was her backpack found so far from the trail? And most importantly, where was Michelle? As the search for Michelle Carpenter entered its third day, investigators began a parallel track of inquiry, delving deeper into her personal life while search teams continued to comb the increasingly muddy terrain around Eagle Ridge. Sheriff Monroe had assigned Deputy Lisa Chen to interview Michelle's friends, co-workers, and acquaintances, building a more complete picture of her life beyond what was already known. Through these conversations, a previously undisclosed aspect of Michelle's life came to light. Laura Bennett, during her second interview, revealed that Michelle had recently ended a relationship with Mark Thornton, a forestry consultant who periodically worked in the region. According to Laura, the relationship had lasted approximately 7 months before Michelle ended it in late July, about 7 weeks before her disappearance. "She didn't make a big deal of it," Laura explained to Deputy Chen. "Michelle was private about her romantic life in general. She mentioned it almost in passing during one of our Sunday dinners. She said they wanted different things. She was rooted here in Lake Serene, while Mark's work took him all over the Pacific Northwest." This information immediately caught investigators' attention. Deputy Chen expanded her interview list to include other friends who might have knowledge of the relationship. Through these conversations, a consistent picture emerged. The breakup had been initiated by Michelle but appeared amicable. No one reported any concerning behavior from Mark Thornton in the aftermath, no angry phone calls, no unwanted visits to the bookstore, no concerning encounters. State Police Lieutenant Jameson immediately prioritized locating and interviewing Mark Thornton. This proved challenging initially, as his consulting work involved traveling to various logging operations and remote forestry sites, often in areas with limited communication. Eventually, they reached him by radio at a logging operation near the Oregon border, approximately 180 miles from Lake Serene. When informed about Michelle's disappearance, Thornton expressed what investigators described as genuine shock and concern. He immediately offered to drive back to Lake Serene to assist in any way possible. Lieutenant Jameson requested that he first participate in a formal interview at the nearest state police office to his current location. During this interview, Thornton openly discussed his relationship with Michelle. He confirmed they had dated for about 7 months after meeting when he was doing consultancy work for the Lake Serene Forestry Department. He acknowledged that Michelle had ended the relationship but insisted it had been a mutual recognition that their lifestyles weren't compatible long-term. She loved Lake Serene and that bookstore was her life, Thornton told investigators. My work takes me all over 3 states. We both knew it wasn't sustainable. When asked about his whereabouts on the weekend of Michelle's disappearance, Thornton provided a detailed timeline of his activities at a forestry conference in Portland, Oregon, approximately 4 hours from Lake Serene. His alibi was quickly verified through multiple sources. Hotel records confirmed his check-in and key card usage, conference attendance logs showed his participation in several sessions, and 3 colleagues gave statements confirming his presence throughout the weekend. With Thornton effectively eliminated as a person of interest, investigators returned to examining other aspects of Michelle's life that might provide clues to her disappearance. One significant development came when Sheriff Monroe and Deputy Chen conducted a more thorough search of Michelle's cabin with the assistance of state police technicians. In a small spare bedroom that Michelle had converted into a home office, they discovered a recently developed set of photographs in a desk drawer. Most were what they expected: scenic landscapes, wildlife shots, and trail views consistent with her hiking hobby. However, several photos from a hiking trip 3 weeks before her disappearance caught their attention. In 2 separate images of forest scenes, investigators noticed what appeared to be a partial figure at the edge of the frame, someone wearing dark clothing partially obscured by trees. The images were not clear enough to identify a specific person, but they stood out because they appeared accidental rather than intentional, as if Michelle had been photographing the landscape unaware that someone else was in the vicinity. These could be completely innocent, Lieutenant Jameson noted as the team examined the photographs. Other hikers in the area who happened to be caught in the frame. But given the circumstances, we need to consider the possibility that someone was following her on these trails. The technical team digitized the images and attempted to enhance the quality, but the resolution and lighting limited how much detail could be extracted. What they could determine was that the figure appeared to be wearing dark clothing and possibly a cap or hat of some kind. The photos had been taken on the Miners Creek Trail, a different hiking route approximately 5 miles from Eagle Ridge. This discovery led investigators to expand their interviews to include regular hikers and outdoor enthusiasts in the Lake Serene area, showing them the enhanced images and asking if they had noticed anyone matching this vague description on local trails in recent months. Meanwhile, another significant development occurred on the 4th day of the search. A witness came forward in response to the now widespread local media coverage of Michelle's disappearance. Garrett Wilson, a wildlife photographer from a neighboring town, contacted the sheriff's office with information about the Eagle Ridge trailhead from the Saturday of Michelle's disappearance. Wilson had been photographing early morning bird activities near Lake Serene and had parked at the Eagle Ridge trailhead around 7:30 a.m. He recalled seeing a dark green pickup truck already in the parking area when he arrived. What caught his attention, and what prompted him to contact investigators, was that the truck was gone when he returned to his car around 9:15 a.m., yet it had not passed him on the trail. I remember thinking it was odd, Wilson explained during his interview. The only way that truck could have left without me seeing it on the trail was if the driver had turned around very early in their hike, or if they'd gone off trail almost immediately. Neither made much sense for someone who had arrived so early to hike. Wilson described the vehicle as an older model dark green pickup with a small dent on the passenger side door. He couldn't recall the license plate but was certain about the make being a Ford. Most importantly, he didn't remember seeing anyone at or near the vehicle when he arrived. The driver was either already on the trail or remained inside the truck. This information added another layer of complexity to the timeline. If Michelle had arrived at the trailhead around 8 a.m. as planned, she might have encountered whoever drove this unidentified green truck. Investigators immediately added this vehicle description to the information being distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout the region. Despite the expanded search operation, now including over 70 personnel and multiple dog teams, no further physical evidence was found at the Eagle Ridge trail system. The continuing poor weather hampered efforts, washing away potential evidence and making conditions increasingly dangerous for the search teams themselves. No signs of struggle, blood evidence, or discarded personal items were located. After 5 full days of intensive searching, Sheriff Monroe and the state police team conducted a comprehensive review of their findings and approach. The search radius had been expanded to cover over 15 square miles of challenging terrain with no additional traces of Michelle beyond her abandoned backpack. While search efforts would continue at a reduced capacity, investigators now faced the possibility that they might not find Michelle in the wilderness, either because she had left the area under unknown circumstances, or because those responsible for her disappearance had taken measures to conceal evidence. As news of the stalled search spread through Lake Serene, the community response intensified. The town had already been supporting the official search efforts through food donations, volunteer assistance, and helping to staff the tip line established at the local fire station. Now, residents began organizing their own search parties, focusing on areas beyond those already covered by official teams. Rebecca Winters temporarily closed Michelle's bookstore, converting it into an informal headquarters for community efforts. Maps of the surrounding wilderness areas covered the walls, with colored pins marking areas that had been searched and those still pending. Volunteers created and distributed flyers featuring Michelle's photograph throughout Lake Serene and neighboring communities. A local tech-savvy teenager established a rudimentary website to share updates and coordinate volunteer activities. The community's response reflected both their affection for Michelle and the rarity of such events in their small town. Sheriff Monroe, while appreciative of their efforts, worried about the increasingly apparent possibility that they were no longer searching for a lost hiker but investigating something far more concerning. As the investigation approached its second week, with daily search operations continuing but hopes dimming for finding Michelle alive in the wilderness, Lieutenant Jameson shared a troubling observation with Sheriff Monroe. The careful placement of the backpack, the missing camera but presence of her wallet and other valuables, the absence of any signs of wildlife disturbance at the scene, none of this fits with a typical accident or exposure case, she said during their evening briefing. We need to consider that we're looking at an intentional act by a third party. Sheriff Monroe nodded slowly, having reached the same conclusion days earlier but reluctant to voice it in a community where such crimes were virtually unknown. If that's the case, he replied, we need to look beyond Lake Serene. Someone who could do this and leave so little evidence behind, this might not be their first time. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the case of Michelle Carpenter's disappearance remained active but frustratingly static. The initial intensity of the search operation had necessarily diminished, though smaller teams still periodically returned to the Eagle Ridge area when weather permitted. The community's volunteer efforts continued, expanding to distribute flyers and information throughout the entire county and neighboring regions. Sheriff Monroe maintained regular contact with Michelle's parents, who had arrived from Arizona immediately after being notified of their daughter's disappearance. They had stayed in Lake Serene for nearly 3 weeks before reluctantly returning home, leaving behind a network of friends who promised to keep them updated on any developments. The investigation had reached what Lieutenant Jameson called the documentation phase, systematically reviewing all evidence, statements, and timelines, searching for overlooked details or connections. A dedicated state police investigator, Detective Nathan Roberts, was assigned to manage the case files and continue pursuing any new leads that emerged. It was Detective Roberts who, 6 months after Michelle's disappearance, noticed a brief news item about a missing hiker in the Cascade foothills near Pinewood, a small town approximately 80 miles northeast of Lake Serene. The case involved a 31-year-old woman named Kathleen Murray who had failed to return from a day hike 3 days earlier. While missing hikers weren't uncommon in the vast wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest, certain elements of the Pinewood case caught Detective Roberts' attention. Murray was an experienced hiker who knew the trail she was on. She had left a detailed itinerary with friends. Most notably, her vehicle was found at the trailhead, but initial search efforts had found no trace of her on the established trails. Detective Roberts immediately contacted the Pinewood Sheriff's Department, introducing himself and requesting information about their ongoing search. What he learned only strengthened his sense that the cases might be connected. Murray's backpack had been discovered approximately 2 miles from the trailhead, placed under a rocky overhang that protected it from the elements. Her identification and supplies were still inside, but her camera, which friends confirmed she always carried on hikes, was missing. With this information, Detective Roberts and Lieutenant Jameson drove to Pinewood to meet with local law enforcement and review their findings firsthand. The similarities between the cases grew even more striking upon closer examination. Both women were experienced hikers in their late 20s or early 30s. Both disappeared on solo day hikes. Both had their carefully packed backpacks found in locations that appeared deliberately selected to protect them from weather exposure. Both were missing their cameras while other valuables remained untouched. This goes beyond coincidence, Lieutenant Jameson observed as they compared case notes with Pinewood Sheriff Carter. We're potentially looking at related incidents. With this new perspective, Detective Roberts began a systematic review of missing persons cases throughout the Pacific Northwest over the previous 5 years, focusing specifically on hikers and outdoor enthusiasts who disappeared in wilderness areas. Most cases had clear resolutions. The individuals were found either alive or deceased due to accidents, exposure, or medical emergencies. A smaller number remained open but had distinct circumstances, unlike Michelle's and Kathleen's cases. However, 3 additional cases emerged with troubling similarities. 18 months before Michelle's disappearance, a 35-year-old rock-climbing enthusiast named Jennifer Lockhart had vanished from a moderately trafficked trail near Mount Baker, approximately 120 miles north of Lake Serene. Her equipment was found neatly arranged under a tarp in a small cave near the trail. 3 years before that, 29-year-old bird watcher Melissa Chen disappeared from a wildlife refuge about 60 miles east of Pinewood. And 4 years before Michelle, 33-year-old amateur botanist Sarah Reynolds vanished while documenting plant species in a national forest area 40 miles west of Mount Baker. In all 5 cases, spanning 4 years and occurring in a roughly 150-mile radius, the women were outdoors alone, were considered experienced in their activities, and had equipment or belongings found in protected locations away from main trails. 3 of the 5, including Michelle, were confirmed to have had cameras that were missing from their recovered belongings. We're potentially looking at a pattern spanning years, Detective Roberts explained during a briefing with Sheriff Monroe and state police officials. The geographic distribution and timeline suggest someone with intimate knowledge of these wilderness areas who may be specifically targeting women engaging in solo outdoor activities. This disturbing possibility transformed the investigation. A task force was formed combining resources from multiple jurisdictions affected by the potentially related cases. Detective Roberts was assigned as the liaison for Michelle's case, working directly with the task force coordinator, FBI Special Agent Diana Wells, who specialized in potential serial offender cases. As the task force began its work analyzing the 5 cases for additional connections, Detective Roberts returned to Lake Serene to re-examine Michelle's personal effects with this new perspective. With Sheriff Monroe's assistance, he obtained permission from Michelle's parents to conduct a more thorough examination of her journals and personal papers. In a leather-bound journal that covered the 3 months preceding her disappearance, they found several concerning entries that had been overlooked during the initial investigation when authorities were focused primarily on her final known movements. An entry from August 14, approximately a month before she vanished, caught their immediate attention. Beautiful day on Miners Creek Trail. Reached the waterfall overlook around noon. Had the strangest feeling someone was watching me at the second creek crossing. Turned around but didn't see anyone. Same feeling on the return hike. Probably just being paranoid after all those mountain lion warnings posted last week. 2 weeks later, another entry referenced a similar experience. Quick hike on the Lakeview Trail after closing the shop early. Took some great shots of the sunset over the western ridge. Heard branches breaking behind me a couple times, but never saw anyone when I looked. Few other hikers out today. Getting dark earlier now, should probably stick to morning hikes as fall approaches. The final concerning entry came just 9 days before her disappearance. Saw that green pickup at the trailhead again today. Third time I've noticed it in the past month. Never see whoever's driving it though. Weird coincidence. This last entry sent a chill through Detective Roberts and Sheriff Monroe. The mention of a green pickup directly connected to Garrett Wilson's witness statement about seeing such a vehicle at the Eagle Ridge trailhead the morning Michelle disappeared. She noticed something, Sheriff Monroe said quietly. She just didn't recognize it as a threat. The journal entries transformed their understanding of the case. What initially appeared to be a sudden disappearance now showed signs of possible stalking behavior in the weeks leading up to Michelle's hike on Eagle Ridge Trail. The mention of the green pickup provided their first tangible lead in months. Detective Roberts immediately shared these findings with the task force. Agent Wells requested expedited reviews of any journals, social media posts, or communications from the other missing women that might indicate similar experiences prior to their disappearances. Within days, this approach yielded results. Kathleen Murray from Pinewood had texted a friend 3 weeks before she vanished, mentioning that she felt like she was being followed on a popular hiking trail, though she hadn't seen anyone when she looked back. Melissa Chen, the bird watcher who disappeared 3 years earlier, had noted in her birdwatching log that she had twice encountered the same man with binoculars who claimed to be watching eagles but seemed more interested in her location. The task force now had compelling evidence suggesting a methodical predator who observed potential victims on trails before eventually acting. The focus shifted to identifying anyone with access and knowledge of multiple wilderness areas throughout the region who might match this profile. Agent Wells coordinated with forestry departments, park services, and wilderness guide companies, compiling lists of individuals who worked across multiple jurisdictions in the areas where the disappearances occurred. The list of potential persons of interest grew quickly, including seasonal workers, forestry consultants, wildlife researchers, and others whose work gave them legitimate reasons to be in these remote areas. Meanwhile, in Lake Serene, Sheriff Monroe renewed the public appeal for information specifically about the green Ford pickup truck, now believed to be directly connected to Michelle's disappearance. The vehicle description was circulated throughout the region, along with a request for information about similar vehicles seen at trailheads or wilderness areas around the times of the other disappearances. As the investigation intensified with this new focus, the task force kept their emerging theory closely guarded. While they now strongly suspected they were dealing with a predator who targeted women in wilderness settings, they released minimal information to the public beyond necessary safety warnings encouraging hikers not to venture out alone. If he knows we've connected these cases, he'll change his pattern or go dormant, Agent Wells explained during a task force briefing. Our best chance of identifying him is if he believes he's still operating undetected. For the residents of Lake Serene, who had lived with the mystery of Michelle's disappearance for over half a year, the renewed investigative activity brought both hope and anxiety. The community had maintained Michelle's presence in various ways, keeping a missing poster prominently displayed in nearly every business window, holding monthly candlelight gatherings at the lakeshore, and continuing volunteer searches on weekends. Rebecca Winters had reopened Michelle's bookstore after 2 months, with the blessing of Michelle's parents, maintaining it exactly as Michelle had left it. A small corner of the shop had been transformed into a memorial space with Michelle's photograph and a notebook where visitors could share memories or messages of hope. As winter gave way to spring in the Pacific Northwest, the gentle rains returning after months of snow, the investigation entered what would prove to be its most crucial phase. The net was slowly tightening around a suspect whose identity remained just beyond their grasp, someone who knew the wilderness well enough to hunt within it undetected, leaving almost no trace beyond the deliberately placed possessions of those he had taken. Spring brought renewed energy to the investigation as the task force continued their methodical work, cross-referencing employment records with locations and timeframes of the 5 disappearances. The list of potential persons of interest had been narrowed from hundreds to dozens, but investigators still lacked the definitive evidence needed to focus on a specific individual. The breakthrough, when it finally came, emerged from an entirely unexpected source. 9 months after Michelle's disappearance, wildlife photographer Garrett Wilson, the same witness who had reported seeing the green pickup truck at the Eagle Ridge trailhead, contacted Sheriff Monroe with information he believed might be relevant to the case. Wilson had been reviewing old memory cards from his camera while preparing for an upcoming photography exhibition. On a card from the previous year, he discovered a series of images taken at dawn near Miners Creek, one of Michelle's regular hiking locations. Wilson had been photographing elk in a meadow when he captured several wide landscape shots of the area. Upon reviewing these images at full resolution on his computer screen, he noticed something he had missed at the time: a human figure at the tree line observing the meadow from a concealed position. "I remember taking these shots clearly," Wilson explained when he brought the memory card to the sheriff's office. "It was just after sunrise, and I was focused on the elk. I never noticed anyone else in the area." The high-resolution images, taken with professional equipment, provided remarkable clarity despite the distance. The figure was partially concealed behind a large Douglas fir, but clearly visible was a man wearing dark green clothing, a cap, and carrying what appeared to be both binoculars and a camera with a telephoto lens. Most importantly, in one of the images where the man had shifted position slightly, the distinctive green Ford pickup was visible parked on a maintenance access road behind him. These images were immediately shared with the task force. The combination of the man's appearance, the vehicle matching Wilson's previous description, and the location being one of Michelle's known hiking areas created a potential breakthrough. Technical specialists enhanced the images further, providing enough detail of the man's face for potential identification. Agent Wells coordinated with forensic analysts to extract every possible detail from the photographs. The vehicle's partial license plate was visible in one frame, narrowing their focus to a specific sequence of letters and numbers. The man's distinctive jacket appeared to be a specific brand used by forestry services in the region. Most significantly, a patch or logo on his cap became visible under enhancement, the emblem of a logging company that had operated in the area several years earlier. These details led investigators to Robert Hadley, a 47-year-old former forestry worker who had been employed by various logging operations and conservation projects throughout the Pacific Northwest over the past decade. His employment history revealed a striking pattern: he had worked in the vicinity of each disappearance within months of when the women vanished. His most recent position had been with a wildfire prevention project that included areas around Lake Serene, ending just 2 weeks before Michelle disappeared. A background check revealed concerning information about Hadley. 20 years earlier, he had been questioned in connection with the harassment of a female park ranger in Montana, though no charges were filed. He had a hunting license and was known to be an experienced outdoorsman. Most significantly, he owned a 1994 Ford F-150 pickup truck, dark green in color, registered to an address approximately 40 miles from Lake Serene, a remote cabin on privately owned land near the boundary of National Forest property. With this information, Agent Wells secured a search warrant for Hadley's residence. The task force assembled a tactical team, approaching the isolated cabin with caution, aware that they were potentially dealing with someone who knew the wilderness intimately and could easily evade capture if alerted to their presence. Hadley was not at the property when investigators arrived. The cabin, a simple, one-room structure with basic amenities, appeared to have been unoccupied for several days. Inside, investigators found meticulously organized camping and hiking equipment, numerous maps of wilderness areas throughout the region with trails and remote locations marked, and a collection of wildlife photography books. A more thorough search revealed a locked storage compartment beneath a trapdoor in the cabin floor. When opened, it contained items that immediately connected to the 5 disappearances: a collection of women's identification cards including Michelle's driver's license, 5 digital cameras of different models matching those described as missing from the women's belongings, and carefully labeled memory cards. Most disturbing were detailed journals documenting observations of women hiking alone on various trails, descriptions of their routines, the equipment they carried, and the routes they preferred. These journals revealed a pattern of surveillance spanning years, with entries becoming more focused and frequent before each disappearance. While processing the scene, investigators received word that Hadley had been located and taken into custody while attempting to purchase supplies in a small town approximately 20 miles from his cabin. He offered no resistance during the arrest, maintaining silence as he was transported to the regional FBI office for questioning. The evidence recovered from the cabin provided investigators with what they had been seeking for months: direct links between the 5 cases and a single individual. Forensic technicians carefully processed the recovered cameras and memory cards, discovering hundreds of photographs taken of the women, often without their knowledge, as they hiked alone on various trails. The images showed a progression from distant surveillance to closer observation over time. Michelle's camera contained the final photographs she had taken on Eagle Ridge Trail, scenic views of the autumn foliage, a close-up of an interesting mushroom formation, and finally, a startled shot of the ground in her boot, as if she had been surprised while taking pictures. This last image was time-stamped at 10:17 a.m. on the day she disappeared. As investigators built their case, the recovery efforts for the 5 women continued. With Hadley now in custody and the investigation focused on specific areas based on information gleaned from his maps and journals, search teams returned to previously unexplored locations deep in the wilderness. 3 months after Hadley's arrest, following his limited but significant cooperation with investigators as part of plea negotiations, the remains of Michelle Carpenter and 2 of the other missing women were located in remote areas far from any marked trails. The discoveries brought closure to families who had lived with uncertainty for years, allowing for proper memorial services and remembrance. Throughout the legal proceedings that followed, investigators maintained their focus on the methodical police work that had ultimately resolved the case rather than sensationalizing the disturbing details. Hadley eventually pleaded guilty to multiple charges related to the disappearances, receiving consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. For the community of Lake Serene, the resolution of Michelle's case brought a complex mixture of emotions. The relief of finally understanding what had happened was tempered by the tragedy of the loss and the unsettling reality that such darkness had touched their peaceful town. In the months following the conclusion of the case, the community worked to process these feelings together, holding a memorial service at the lake where hundreds gathered to celebrate Michelle's life and legacy. Rebecca Winters, with the blessing of Michelle's parents, transformed the bookstore into Michelle's Books, maintaining it as both a thriving business and a subtle memorial to its original owner. The shop became known throughout the region for its exceptional collection of nature guides and outdoor literature, drawing hikers and outdoor enthusiasts who often came away with not just books but also a heightened awareness of safety practices in wilderness areas. Sheriff Monroe, who had lived with the case daily for over a year, reflected on the investigation during a community meeting held to discuss wilderness safety in the aftermath of the case's resolution. What ultimately solved this case wasn't just technology or forensic science, he explained to the gathered residents. It was community vigilance, people like Garrett Wilson noticing details and coming forward, friends recognizing when patterns changed, and investigators from multiple agencies working together to connect seemingly unrelated incidents across jurisdictions and years. The identification and extensive documentation of these cases led to significant improvements in how missing persons reports involving hikers and outdoor enthusiasts were handled throughout the Pacific Northwest. Agencies developed enhanced protocols for recognizing potential connections between disappearances across different wilderness areas, and information sharing between jurisdictions became more systematic and thorough. As rain continued to fall gently on the roof of the community center during Sheriff Monroe's presentation, the residents of Lake Serene began the process of reclaiming their sense of safety while honoring Michelle's memory through concrete actions, establishing hiking clubs that ensured no one went into the wilderness alone, creating a trail stewardship program that monitored remote areas, and developing an early notification system for hikers who failed to return on schedule. The case that had begun with a missing bookstore owner had revealed vulnerabilities none had previously recognized, but also strengths few had fully appreciated until they were tested: the power of community vigilance, the importance of connection, and the resilience of a small town determined to protect its own. As our story draws to a close, the soft rainfall continues, a reminder of both the beauty and the occasional danger that nature presents. The case of Michelle Carpenter and the events at Lake Serene offer us several reflections to carry with us, even as we drift toward sleep. In the years following the resolution of Michelle's case, wilderness safety awareness throughout the Pacific Northwest underwent a significant transformation. Hiking groups established buddy systems and check-in protocols. Park services expanded their outreach on safety practices. Technology companies developed apps allowing outdoor enthusiasts to share their planned routes and expected return times with emergency contacts. These changes represent a fitting legacy for Michelle, practical improvements that help protect others who share her love of wild places. Her passion for nature and literature lives on not just in these safety measures, but in the physical memorial established at her favorite viewpoint above Lake Serene. A simple stone bench with a bronze plaque invites hikers to pause, rest, and appreciate the panoramic vista of mountains and water that Michelle so often photographed. The bench bears an inscription from one of Michelle's favorite authors: "In every walk with nature, one receives far more than one seeks." Visitors often leave a small stone on the bench, a hiker's tradition to mark their passage and connection to those who came before. Michelle's story reminds us that even in our most solitary moments, we remain connected to a broader community that notices our absence, values our presence, and works tirelessly to protect us when we're vulnerable. It speaks to the remarkable persistence of those who refuse to allow mysteries to remain unsolved and questions to go unanswered. As you continue your journey toward restful sleep, carry with you not the darkness of this story, but rather the light of human connection and community care that ultimately prevailed. Remember that for every shadow in the woods, there are countless helpers, searchers, and guardians working to keep us safe. The rain continues to fall outside your window, a gentle rhythm accompanying your breathing as it slows and deepens. Perhaps in your dreams tonight, you might visit a peaceful lake surrounded by evergreens, where the water reflects the sky and mountains in perfect stillness. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully, knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you are still awake, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.